We have already said above that the grace of God can be lost only because of sin, and if the Lord takes it away from the sinner, the person becomes helpless, weak-willed, and defenseless, both when attacked by evil people, moved by the spirits of evil, and when the demons themselves are directly affected. That is why in his famous penitential psalm the king and prophet David asks the Creator, "Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me." Psalm 50:13. He learned from his own experience what it means to take away, to deprive of the grace of the Holy Spirit. Lack of grace always leads to a well-known disease called paralysis of the will, which allows demons to drag the weakened with them into any filth, into any abomination of the most heinous sin. And since sin, as we have already said, is the reason for the departure of the grace-filled divine energies from a person, opening up the possibility for demons to penetrate into his soul and body, it becomes clear that asceticism is the strongest way of protecting a Christian from this penetration. That is why demons and their agents of influence are trying with all their might to vulgarize and humiliate or distort the idea of fasting, and, if possible, completely exclude from the consciousness of people the very mention of any abstinence, asceticism. However, in cases where agents of influence cannot wage an open war with the Church, they are not even averse to talking hypocritically about its moral benefits. But we should clearly understand that they are ready to tolerate only such a church, from the teachings of which the concepts of the fight against sin, the fight against demons, we should be silent about them altogether. And, of course, asceticism as a method of fighting demonic influence would be completely excluded from its teachings on the flesh, mind, and emotional sphere of man. The adherents of the anti-system would be completely satisfied if the Orthodox Church outwardly preserved all its splendor and traditions, churches with shining crosses on domes, gilded iconostases, euphonious singing and solemn worship, but at the same time would abandon the main thing, the doctrine of the need to fight against sin, about the crucifixion of their passions and lusts, about the obligation of self-denial, about the narrow and thorny path, about the need for abstinence, about bearing the cross. In such a church the sacraments will lose their grace-filled power. All this already exists in Protestantism and, to a lesser extent, in Catholicism. It remains only to transfer the experience accumulated in the West into the bosom of the Orthodox Church with the help of the eradication of the concept of sin in the public consciousness, including in the minds of clergy. This is done by the media, promoting, for example, sexual freedom, as well as with the help of ecumenical erosion of dogmatic differences between confessions, and then the trick is in the bag. Such a church is not terrible for demons. She will not protect anyone from their power. Let us illustrate the attitude of conscientious sorcerers contactees to the Orthodox Church in its teaching on the fight against sin through abstinence, asceticism, with words from an interview with the sorcerer U.B. Tarasov to the correspondent of the newspaper Trud. In the future, I may begin to claim the throne of the Patriarch of Moscow in all Russia. CORR. What for? You know, you can't explain it in a nutshell. But in short, I want to reform the Church to some extent. I want to remind everyone that Christianity did not appear out of nowhere. Before him there was already paganism. Of course, it is not the ideal of faith. But Christianity is not the last truth either. I personally do not accept asceticism in it, with a slight touch of fanaticism. All these commandments are about adultery, wine, women in general, obligatory beating with the forehead, observing different fasts there, etc. In Christianity, in my opinion, the main thing is compassion, and the obligation of good deeds. The rest is superficial, invented for the sake of time. It is necessary to combine Christianity and paganism. Paganism is, first of all, closeness to nature. Christianity is moral principles. Is not it? Why does an atheist need holy water? Unwittingly, even perfect. They are often unbelievers, as exemplified by an incident told to me by a priest I know. His former colleague in the secular profession, a physicist, being himself a contactee, he received a lot of information about his profession directly from space, improved his qualifications in physics with the help of occultism. In one of the Moscow laboratories he tried to create a mechanical generator of bioenergy, developed devices that could emit it. With the help of the so-called dowsing frames, he found out on the map where the next UFO landed and, going to the landing site, sometimes even found there fragments of skyships, according to his assumption, suffered an accident. It is noteworthy that at the landing site this scientist felt so bad that he even vomited. This enthusiast of the occult developed engines of the first and second kind, with the help of which, as the experimenters believed, UFOs move with fantastic speed, dramatically changing the direction of flight. In practice, as the scientist believed, it was movement, as it were, in another, thin parallel world, and not in our material world. The phenomena of this world should, according to this physicist, obey some physical laws. He claimed to have discovered how one of these anti-gravity engines works, with which you can lift any machine, that is, levitate. It is curious that he discovered many things by rotating the dowsing frame, although the humanoids often deceived him. Nevertheless, he believed that he could always double-check everything with the help of a framework and catch the energy allies on disinformation. Some devices, for example, experimental generators of bioenergy, he even made at home. There were many such devices in his room. But he complained to a former colleague, now a priest. Everything would be fine, but the devices leave behind bad traces. In the places where they stood, some negative energy remains, very harmful to health, which cannot be removed in any way. The state of health of the researchers inside the anomalous zones and even near them was terrible. Many of the researchers in his laboratory fell ill, some with cancer, others with other serious ailments, and some of them died. Finding ways to eliminate negative energy has become an important task for researchers. One day, one of the employees suggested sprinkling the dirty places with holy water, which his grandmother brings from the church. Have tried it. The result exceeded all expectations. The search for other means of purification from dirty energy did not lead to anything. There is nothing to do. This physicist from a satellite city near Moscow had to regularly travel to the Trinity Sergius Lavra with cans for holy water. At the same time, he continued to remain an unbelieving person and, moreover, had a negative attitude towards both the priests and the church. Reflecting on the possibility of using engines of the first and second kind, which practically do not consume energy, to travel to other planets, he said with some annoyance to the priest, his childhood friend. Apparently, we will have to take a priest to the space team so that he blesses the water and periodically sprinkles everything with this water so that you can fly under normal conditions. This incident clearly shows that the grace of God, which blessed the water through the prayers of an Orthodox priest, is much more powerful than all the evil energies of virtuous and humane aliens. On the origin of demonic energies. It will be timely, it seems to us, to raise now the very important question of the origin of dirty or demonic energy, whose actions outwardly very often copy the actions of divine grace, although their results from a spiritual point of view are directly opposite. Here we should remember that everything created by God has no flaws in anything, since each of the elements of creation can ideally fulfill the function that the Creator assigned to it. And God saw all that he had made, and, behold, it was very good. Gen. 131. So, a completely natural question arises: if all created, and even more uncreated, divine energies were directed only for the good and were creative, then where did the destructive energies come from, leading to spiritual catastrophes? It would be appropriate to recall that evil is a moral category that does not have any independent existence outside the conscious personality, outside the self-conscious subject, who has freedom in relation to moral laws that objectively exist and do not depend on him. These laws were given by God for intelligent beings created in his image, i.e. for angels and people. Practical conclusions from these laws were formulated for people by the Creator himself in the form of commandments and represent, as it were, a hint from a loving father who warns and protects children from wrong steps that violate the moral balance of the world. Thus, a violation of the commandments is a violation of spiritual laws, and therefore, a violation to a greater or lesser degree of the equilibrium of the universe, and these violations cause, as a cause, a chain of consequences, resulting in unhappiness for the one who broke the law. So, for example, the violation by the first people on earth of the only commandment of the Father was a violation of the law of love. We will not talk about it in detail here. As a result, this led to catastrophic consequences for the entire created material world, to the appearance of destruction and death in it, since a person participates with his body in this part of the universe. It is this connection between the macrocosm, universe, and the microcosm, man, that allows us to call spiritual laws anthropocosmic. To the appearance of destruction and death in it, since a person is involved with his body in this part of the universe. It is this connection between the macrocosm, universe, and the microcosm, man, that allows us to call spiritual laws anthropocosmic. To the appearance of destruction and death in it, since a person is involved with his body in this part of the universe. It is this connection between the macrocosm, universe, and the microcosm, man, that allows us to call spiritual laws anthropocosmic. But, nevertheless, the original cause of the emergence of evil in the universe was not people, but intelligent beings of the spiritual, parallel, world, i.e. angels created by God long before the first humans appeared on earth. Most of the Holy Fathers attribute the creation of angels to the earliest period of creation, when neither matter nor the material world appeared yet. In any case, we can say that they, angels, called the sons of God in the Bible, existed even before the appearance of the earth, i.e. earlier than the third day, period, of creation, as the Creator himself speaks to righteous Job, see Job 38, 4-7. So, long before the appearance of man in the universe, as mentioned above, some of the beings of angelic nature voluntarily violated the law of love. The natural consequence of this reason was the departure from them of the grace-filled, uncreated, energies of the Holy Spirit, the highest of which is love. But since all angels, as sons of God, bearing the image of the Father, were created eternal, and God does not violate his definitions, then even after falling away from God, this part of the angels continues to exist, and exist at his expense, i.e. at the expense of his created energies. For the grace-filled, uncreated, divine energies are no longer available to them. And this existence will not end even after the completion of the modern form of human existence and the last judgment. Demons, as well as all people who took their side, and these are those who did not want to take the side of Christ, on the path of fulfilling his commandments, as was revealed by God to the Apostle John the theologian, will live forever. Being in fiery hell or in hell, a special sphere of the new world, behold, I create everything new, Rev. 21:5. This sphere, this level of being will be completely separated from those spheres of the future world, which are usually called paradise, the kingdom of heaven, eternal life, heaven, or the womb of Abraham. It is about this separate, but in both cases, eternal existence that Christ spoke in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, and besides all this, a great gulf is established between us and you, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot. And from there to us they cannot they pass. Luke 16:26. Thus, demons, like, indeed, sinful people, continue to live, move, think, and create, using the created energies of God, for we, said the Apostle Paul, by him we live and move and exist, Acts 17:28. Moreover, everything in the universe, both the spiritual and its material parts with all the planets and galaxies, lives and moves only by the energies of its creator, who is their only source. But thanks to the presence of free will, it can direct the energy with which an intelligent godlike creature lives and moves into sin. Moreover, the Creator, who gave him the freedom of choice, does not deprive him of this freedom even when the individual chooses evil, although in some cases he limits him. That is why both an evil person and a demon, living by the created energies of the Creator, at their own will and can, if God permits, do, for example. In order to better understand the reason for the appearance of demonic energies in the world, let us give the following comparison. The moon, as you know, is not a source of light, but it also shines, although not by its own, but by reflected light, and this changed, moonlight, is unlike the sun. In the same way, the demons who live by the energies of the Creator, letting them through their will defiled by sin, do evil, but only to the extent that God allows it, who directs everything, even the evil done by people and demons, to the salvation of those who desire to be saved, i.e. for the benefit of. Thus, we again come to the conclusion that the fundamental difference between the actions of Christ and Christian saints, on the one hand, and the actions of magicians, sorcerers, and psychics, similar in direction, at least, as declared, on the other, is that Christ and his saints act with the grace-filled divine energies of the Holy Spirit, which are absolutely inaccessible to people who do not live according to the commandments of God and are not real members of His holy church. In addition, as we have already shown with numerous examples, the direct effects of demons, as well as any effects they exert on a person through the mediation of any occultists, can be destroyed by the divine grace that Orthodox prayers and church sacraments send down to the believing Christian. Should you be a co-author of the devil? Perhaps, when reading the chapters on the creative self-realization of demons, one of the readers will make the wrong conclusion that all art is from the devil. But we will come to upset them. This conclusion is fundamentally false. Man, as a godlike creature, possesses creative abilities precisely because he bears the image of God, and therefore can create independently. God creates each human soul himself, personally and directly. This teaching was formulated by the Holy Fathers at the Ecumenical Council. While the body creates by means of two other organisms that have a genetic reproduction program recorded by the Creator on biochemical carriers of information, and genes. Reasonable spiritual essence of a person, i.e. his soul, which is, first of all, the bearer of the image of its Creator. That is why we have every right to call God, Father, is united with the embryo, zygote, while still in the womb. At creation, the soul receives from God the main features of God-likeness, including the ability, even the desire for creativity. However, a person who is not protected by the grace of the Holy Spirit will certainly be exposed to demons in one form or another. And the more talented a person is initially, the more it is of interest to the fallen angels. This is understandable, since a demon with a need for self-expression will certainly try to find the most suitable person for the realization of his goals, just as a good musician looks for the highest quality instrument, knowing that the quality of performance will also depend on this. Thus, the demon will take advantage of a talented, but graceless person with no less pleasure than the violinist with the famous violin of the great Stradivarius. How many brilliantly gifted people fell for the old primitive bait, with the help of which the ancient alien, who took the form of a serpent, seduced our progenitors Adam and Eve, be like gods, but without God. Our ancestors, not heeding the warning of the Creator, instead of the omnipotence promised by the serpent received a life full of sorrows, and instead of immortality, death. Similarly, those who could not resist the false promises of the tempter and made the longed-for contact with the deceiver find themselves in the ashes of good hopes and lofty aspirations. If they do not repent and return to the source of life, they will pay the price of the death of their souls for the devil's bills for the demonic source of creative gifts. But if such is the price, then perhaps it is better not to write a single line than to be a co-author of the devil. Here, it seems to us, a few words should be said about one interesting and even paradoxical phenomenon that is observed among those creative people who consciously or unconsciously contact colleagues from the parallel world. Many of the readers, probably, have already paid attention to the fact that even among such poets who in their works glorify sinful passions, mostly prodigal, and sometimes openly blaspheme, nevertheless, there are often very bright and clean lines. This phenomenon is explained, firstly, by the fact that every human soul, even defiled by sin, bears the image of God, and therefore, to one degree or another, also possesses natural good, inherent in every godlike person from the beginning. It is this that can sometimes manifest itself in creativity. And secondly, as our observations show, demons only in the very last stages of enslavement of the will and mind of the individual supervise and control him constantly. At all intermediate stages of mastering a person, they affect him with more or less, in time, frequency, i.e. intermissions between states of altered consciousness, psychotic states, can have a different duration. It is when the demon leaves a person for a while and the poet, as they say, comes to his senses, returning to the state of pre-morbid, he can create his own works that do not carry sinful poison or blasphemy. At such moments, Lermontov, Yesenin, Mayakovsky, Tsvetiva, Vysotsky and many other poets created their brightest works. It seems to us that the poetic fruit could even reveal a greater or lesser degree of obsession of various poets. But what should a person of the creative profession do, who feels that sometimes someone outside is dictating ready-made lines, images, or musical phrases to him? The corresponding chapters describe how this happens. We advise him, without hiding his head in the sand, to realize that he is already at the edge of the abyss. In order to avoid moral and later creative degeneration, as well as other grave consequences up to the death of his immortal soul, it is necessary to get rid of the unexpected co-authorship as soon as possible. True, sometimes it is very difficult to admit it to yourself. Present, i.e. creativity free from demonic influence, inspired by the radiance of good, selflessness, sacrifice, bright joy, is always alien to pride and immorality. An artist who becomes a repeater of the demon's creative exercises, as a rule, quickly loses the moral guidelines of creativity. In his striving for self-expression, everything is allowed, no matter how bad it may be. More and more painful vanity and self-esteem grows in him. An artist can be truly vigilant to the inner state of the soul only under the cover of divine grace, that is, if he regularly cleans his conscience with the sacraments of repentance and communion. This gives him the power to create in accordance with the divine will. For people of creativity, I think, the reflections of the Kostroma artist Oleg Besanov, who unconsciously was fond of demonism in art, will be interesting. Fortunately, the search for truth led the artist to Christ, revealing to him the abyss over which he was balancing. Here is an excerpt from his letter. Carrying out an idea and the artist's work on another piece is like carrying and raising a child. And just as the Holy Church commands the fruitful one to strengthen the hope of prayer and more often resort to the life-giving sacraments, so the artist should, while nurturing, raising his handmade child, seek grace, so that what is born may be a grace-filled fruit. Embodying his children and giving them to the viewer, a man-artist needs to prayerfully call on the heavenly artist, asking him to cleanse our hands from the dust of our sinful nature and this world. A real artist is a bare nerve. The business of the individual is to understand whether this nerve is shaking the spirit of the adversary, or whether the Spirit of God gently touches him. This is very important, because even the most outwardly noble work can be penetrated by a subtle cunning charmer. His unsurpassed acting is able to uplift the soul in vanity, to ensure the praise and admiration of this world. The very same viewer, visiting the museum, exhibition hall, does not bother to protect himself with a cross and prayer. The spiritual world is subtle. It manifests itself in various ways in the intricacy of lines, patterns, melodies, poems. Quietly and imperceptibly it is able to penetrate into the depths of the human soul and deceive imperceptibly. Without God, we are sick and dead, both for the artist and the viewer. Some practical advice for doubters. How to get rid of contacts. As practice has shown, a person who has come into contact with a parallel world, even if he understands the unnatural situations, even agreeing with the orthodox point of view on the essence of what is happening, far from always decides to take practical steps. Realizing that it is necessary to get rid of the demon's lodgers, people suffering from them for various reasons, as a rule, do not dare to resort to the grace-filled protection of the church for a long time, some out of false embarrassment to do something wrong. Some from excessive hope for their own strengths, who, having got used to the inconveniences, to put it mildly, of his position, who for other reasons. Meanwhile, delay in such situations forces a person to plunge deeper into negative experiences. This is fraught with very difficult spiritual and physical conditions, depression, and even suicide attempts. Let's try to give some advice to those who have not yet turned to the Orthodox Church for help. Perhaps these tips for unchurched people may seem too simple, but if you are determined to really get rid of the uninvited curators of your life, they will help you take a step towards liberation. What if you see a UFO? If ever in the sky or on Earth you have to see something unusual, unfamiliar luminous objects, strange humanoid figures, in no way. The case should not show curiosity or fear. Fear is the demon's favorite weapon. You can do whatever you want with someone who is afraid. It is no coincidence that many contactees describe a state of paralyzing fear when meeting with aliens. Remember that you have the protection that we talked about above, the power of the sign of the cross and prayer to God. In the very first seconds of the appearance of a UFO or aliens, one should, without wasting time looking at what is happening, overshadow oneself with the correct sign of the cross. With folded 3 fingers put a seal on the forehead, on the belly, on the right and left shoulder. Saying, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Then cross the object and call for the help of the Lord, the Mother of God and the guardian angel. Usually Orthodox Christians in such cases read prayers to the honest and life-giving cross. May God rise and be scattered around him. Psalm 90, alive in the help of Vishnu Yoga. Prayer Our Father, Jesus Prayer, they are printed in Orthodox prayer books which can be found in every temple. Some of the necessary prayers can be found at the end of the book. Under no circumstances should you enter into communication with the luminous creatures that have appeared in front of you. Look into their eyes. It is often enough to sign them with the sign of the cross once, for the glamour to disappear without a trace. Demons are powerless before the power of the sign of the cross in prayer and will not be able to do anything to you if it is not allowed by God. Permission, however, often happens for admonition. If a person deliberately sought contact with a dark force, for example, mentally or during an occult session, during meditation he called on higher powers, extraterrestrial intelligence, spirit of some celebrity, etc. Protects us from the wiles of the evil one and the pectoral cross, worn not as a decoration or a talisman just in case, but with faith in the redemptive power of the Savior's sacrifice on the cross. Then the Lord himself becomes between man and the dark force. If a poltergeist or Barabashka settled in the house. In those cases when the creatures of the parallel world, demons, show their presence in your house, for example, you hear incomprehensible knocks, steps, spontaneous fires, objects begin to move, etc. The house should be consecrated by inviting an Orthodox priest for this. No other methods of sanctification will help. A common mistake made by spiritually inexperienced people is to address a grandmother, whose address is helpfully offered by knowledgeable relatives and acquaintances. In the house of such babus, under the cover of Orthodox icons, completely non-Orthodox things are happening. And God forbid to follow any advice of such a sorceress, to stick protective needles over the door, sprinkle something in the corners, whisper something, walk around the apartment with a lit candle. After that, real performances can begin in your house, demonic amateur performances. I would also like to warn against the erroneous attitude towards the consecration of the house as a kind of magical action that will help by itself, without changing the life of the owners of the house. If there are books about karma, healing with energies, dream books, astrological and other occult literature in the cupboards, if the walls are decorated with demonic masks brought from overseas travels, if you don't want to part with various amulets, talismans, with playing cards. If obscene language is still heard in the house, all this is a sign that you have not rejected the demons and have not decided to free yourself from contact with other worldly forces. It is impossible, as the scripture says, to simultaneously serve God and the devil. The Creator does not accept any duality. It is unlikely that the consecration of the house will help, if you do not want to part with the habit of reading mystical books and watching space, vampire, and occult fiction films. In such a house, from which one annoying demon was driven out by consecration, 7 evil demons will enter the vacant place, according to the word of the gospel. Conscious servants of demons nowadays even publish tips on how to get a brownie in your dwelling, how to feed him. It has become fashionable to have your own demon in the house. Naturally, this does not specify the real name of the cute old man who supposedly should become your defender. Remember the commercial "What a House Without a Brownie." Conscious servants of demons nowadays even publish tips on how to get a brownie in your dwelling, how to feed him. It has become fashionable to have your own demon in the house. Naturally, this does not specify the real name of the cute old man who supposedly should become your defender. Remember the commercial "What a House Without a Brownie." Conscious servants of demons nowadays even publish tips on how to get a brownie in your dwelling, how to feed him. It has become fashionable to have your own demon in the house. Naturally, this does not specify the real name of the cute old man who supposedly should become your defender. Remember the commercial "What a House Without a Brownie." Consecration of the house, and there is a special rite for such cases, with a prayer from the charm of evil spirits, can really help those people who want to change their lives and build it according to the commandments of God. In this case, nothing unclean will enter the house anymore, especially if we sanctify all things brought into the apartment with prayer and holy water and sign the sign of the cross on food. One should not be embarrassed if, after the consecration of the house, performed by the priest, for some time the bad phenomena intensify. This could be a farewell concert of disgruntled settlers. With the prayerful mood of the owners of the house, these phenomena usually stop after a few days. In the future, in the restless house, it is good to sprinkle all the rooms with holy, preferably baptismal, water every day, in all corners crosswise, while saying, In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Incense with incense consecrated in the church. If you or your family members have superpowers, refrain from violent jubilation over the divine source for no reason. Suddenly appeared in you abilities for any kind of creativity, which you have never done before, for seeing the aura, for extrasensory treatment. In fact, nothing suddenly or by itself happens. Try to soberly assess the situation in the light of the above. Find the courage to admit that this demon realizes its abilities through you, skillfully playing on your pride. Most, even very sober-minded people in such a situation will have a proud thought, now, it turns out, how capable I am. Try to understand the reason for this connection. It happens that demons gain access to a person after reading, even out of curiosity, some occult book. The descriptions of many Oriental methods of treatment often contain incomprehensible phrases that must be pronounced supposedly to regulate breathing and the tone of the diaphragm. As a rule, such phrases contain a spell that summons a demon or the name of a demon. Calling which, thus calling an alien. A person gets a long-term use of the daemon tenant. There are many ways to get such a gift. Some 5 or 10 years ago watched Kashpirovsky's sessions on television, and he can be compared to a psychotronic time bomb. The fruits of demonic influence may appear several years later. Someone turned to sorcerers, to grandmothers who are also sorceresses, only in disguise. Someone used water and creams charged by Alan Cumack. Someone got medical treatment from a psychic. Others are lucky after attending auditing with Scientologists or participating in some occult gathering. There are many ways to get a demon as a settler, but the cure, as we have already said, is one. This is the grace received in the sacraments of the Orthodox Church. Realizing which of our actions, contrary to the commandments of God, could attract to us the increased attention of seducers from a parallel world, we must, with God's help, try to collect our will and firmly say no to such a source of creativity or paranormal abilities. Then go to the temple for confession and repent of your sinful deeds and thoughts with the intention of never returning to them. We will not dwell on the details of preparing for confession and communion. This literature can be found in the bookstore of any church. Often, even after staying at the shrines, for example, at the relics of St. Seraphim of Sarab and Divayevo or at the Holy Spring, Gramayachi Klyuk, not far from Sergiev Pozad, all extraordinary abilities disappear without a trace, which once again convinces us of their far from divine origin. But what if your child shows some unusual creative qualities? Here wisdom and sobriety are needed. God-given talents for music, literature, painting appear naturally and harmoniously. Although in this case one must be careful when developing talents, but not forcing them, not striving at all costs to make the child a prodigy. Such a painful desire for self-affirmation often leads to the fact that the gifts given by God stop developing. They can really grow only under the cover of grace. And the prodigy begins to create creations practically without difficulty, as if receiving them ready-made. This is one of the signs that the source of such creativity is demonic. And, of course, parents need to sound the alarm if their child expresses aspirations unusual for age and creativity. Enough has been said about them in the section on ways of self-realization of beings in a parallel world, or some paranormal abilities. Such connection of demons to an infant or a youth is always the result of parental sins. In addition, this may be a treatment at the grandmother, or attending a massive healing session with a psychic, or some other godly business. A child can only be healed by the repentance of the parents, the regular and, if possible, frequent communion of the holy mysteries, as well as unction. Thanks to these sacraments, the child is provided with grace-filled protection. Is it late to repent? People who have joined some form of contact with demons often have a conscience, at least in the beginning, troubled. They cannot help but feel unnatural position. But often, already starting to realize the essence of what is happening, especially if a person has gone beyond a single contact and is thoroughly entangled in the occult jungle. For example, he himself began to heal as a psychic or underwent initiation. Any of his attempts to escape causes an intensified attack of demons on consciousness. And although demons cannot hinder the search for truth, they can put in thoughts that can lead to despair. They say, there is no way back for such a sinner, still God will not forgive him. It's a lie. The history of the Holy Church even knows cases of great magicians turning to Christ. for example, Cyprian, who became a holy Christian martyr, from whom we now ask for prayer help against the influence of evil spirits. Moreover, a sinner who has fallen into the devil's net through spiritual ignorance can be forgiven. And there is no need to be embarrassed by the horrors that demons set in motion in order to intimidate a person and lead him away from repentance. Above, we described such phenomena as the sensation of snakes crawling over the body or worms moving under the skin. You can feel a lump moving inside the womb, excruciating vibrations, and much more can be annoying. These phenomena often cause panic, but one must remember, they are not eternal and will sooner or later leave if a person decides to start life according to the commandments of God, participating in the church sacraments and asking the Creator for grace-filled help. Repentance can be hindered by the attempts of well-wishers to lead a person who has begun to see the light on the wrong path. When the most unpleasant tactile sensations appear, or in the case of an illness, the diagnosis of which doctors cannot establish, there are always advisors who offer to remove the damage or get rid of the energy blow by occult methods, that is, exorcise the demon with the demon. The consequences are the most unpredictable. It should be noted that it is not someone who leads to damage that is to blame for everything that happened, but the man himself, who came into contact with demons and began to serve them, since by his sins he deprives himself of God's grace and opens up to the influence of evil spirits. In the cases described, demons can enter a person not only through a sorcerer, but also independently. The demons, having a very great hatred of humans, not only humans, but also animals and other things given to us for use from God, are accustomed to harm, as the God-bearing fathers told about this, who had the power from God to cast out demons, parts by crafty people, as with their own instruments, create. However, more than God will allow them, they cannot create. God usually allows such executions for the sake of testing in faith and virtue in order to receive crowns, but more often he strikes them as punishment for sinners. The beginning of healing is true repentance of one's sins and the correction of what one has sinned before God and neighbor. Then one should look for help in church prayer through the divine liturgy, prayer singing, alms, prayers and fasting. But spiritual work in such a situation must be long and persistent. For a person who healed people as a psychic, taught occult knowledge or passed initiation, it is possible to start the holy sacraments of the church only after the rite of renunciation of occult studies. From serving Satan and after joining the Orthodox Church as a person who has fallen away from it. The rite of renunciation is held in Moscow at the Krutitsky Patriarchal Compound in the Counseling Center in the name of Saint Righteous John of Kronstadt. As for the so-called lecture, a special rite for the expulsion of evil spirits held in the Trinity Sergius Lavra and some other monasteries, for which a kind of fashion is now appearing, it should be remembered that without a person's firm intention to change his life, a lecture can turn into him with much greater sorrows, since in place of the expelled demons, according to the word of the gospel, the worst can come. In any case, you cannot go to the lecture without permission, without a blessing, for the company. Only a priest, your confessor, who knows your spiritual state well, can decide whether you need a report or not. Occult in the family. If your relatives have turned to the occult, it can be very difficult to reach out to a consciousness darkened by demons. Such a person, hearing, does not hear and does not perceive the most convincing arguments, because he is a kind of zombie, a slave of a demon who has settled down to him, which distorts his perception. It is useless to prove anything here. It is impossible to pull a person out of the abyss by force, because his soul is given by God the freedom to act according to his own will. It remains only to beg the lost. It is useful, after praying for the enlightenment of his mind and heart, to delicately offer some serious, deep book that analyzes these phenomena, explaining, for example, that there is a lot of material here on a problem that interests him. They usually pray for the weakening of the demonic influence to the martyrs Cyprian and Justinia, the martyr Tryphon, the archangel Michael, the guardian angel. For this there are special prayers and troaria that are printed in Orthodox prayer books. You can order these holy and ethereal heavenly forces to pray for water in churches and monasteries. There is a special kind of prayer, the unbroken psalter, which does not stop day or night. Such a prayer is prayed only in monasteries. You can enroll your relatives for this prayer. Is it possible to protect equipment? Considering the previously listed possibilities of demonic influence on objects of the material world, in particular, the ability of demons to heat, radiation and electromagnetism. Nitric and other effects. One cannot but take into account the possibility of their influence on storage media, on hard and soft disks of computers. In this regard, the protection of technology, especially electronic, from the influence of these demonic creatures of the parallel world becomes of great importance. In particular, it is necessary to consecrate nuclear reactors, nuclear power plants, flight control centers and launching nuclear missiles, all space technology, aircraft, submarines, and all military equipment. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Naturally, in these short tips it is impossible to foresee all the situations in which a person falls who had the misfortune to fall into the network of contact. There are many options for a refined demonic influence on the consciousness, but it is important to be ready for the tricks of evil spirits and to firmly remember that there is no other power but God's grace that could heal even the most serious injuries of the soul. In conclusion, we would like to address our readers with the words of the spirit-bearing ascetic. The founder and teacher of Orthodox monasticism, the monk Anthony the Great, plus 356 AD. May the Lord open the eyes of your hearts so that you can see how many are the intrigues of demons and how much harm they inflict on us every day, being aware of their evil advice, their secret influences and hidden anger, their deceptive lies and blasphemous thoughts, their subtle suggestions that they put into their hearts every day, as well as anger and slander, which they give us, so that we slander each other. Justifying ourselves, Anthony the Great, Spiritual Instructions. Arc, M. 1998, pp. 44-45. Que senia egum nova false of spirituality, or why do demons need contactees? How a communist became a medium. Many people of my generation, especially representatives of the intelligentsia, those who are now 40 to 50 years old, have fully experienced the consequences of godless upbringing, which prepared almost to create a falsified, essentially satanic spirituality. My life went according to the standards of the Soviet people, the pioneers, the Komsomol, the party. I absorbed the wisdom of atheistic faith with a naive confidence in goodness and justice without God. As an idealist, dreaming of disinterested service to the common good, in all other matters I was a firm realist and very skeptical about everything that could not be confirmed by materialistic science. But my atheistic worldview cracked at all the seams when, in the 70s, I accidentally found myself at a seance. The guests gathered for the birthday of one of the journalists amused themselves by asking, Yesenin's spirit, about the development of political events in the USSR. Seeing the saucer spinning under the fingers of people I know well, I curled my lips with contempt. How can intelligent people believe in such obscurantism? Wait to laugh. One of the participants in the mediumistic session told me, now the spirit will say things about you that no one knows. And, to my horror, I saw how the saucer, touching the letters drawn on the circle with an arrow, tells such details of my past life that none of those present could know, but not a single person in this city at all. I rushed to the saucer, pushing aside the newly minted spiritists sitting at the table. Let me go. I'm alone. This time it was the turn of the rest of the participants in the seance to be horrified. The saucer was running like crazy under my fingers, although the magic circle of other participants was relied on to spin it according to all the laws. You are an amazing medium. My friends admired. But at that moment I was not up to praise. Asking questions about everything, I was interested in who speaks on behalf of Yesenin, what is the meaning of human life. I feverishly tried to link what was happening with my materialistic view of the world. At home and in the library, I rummaged through a lot of literature on dualism, but I could not find an answer. Once, passing by the open doors of the temple, I was shocked by the unearthly beauty of the singing coming from there. But I did not dare to enter. After all, I was a communist, the secretary of a party organization. I just thought, if our life ends in death, this is one thing, and if it continues after death, then this is completely different. Then we must live on earth completely to another. My heart sank with anticipation. The meaning of life is not at all in what we were taught. But at that time I was looking for answers to painful questions not in the church, but from my spiritual interlocutor. Drawn under a saucer on a sheet of paper inside the Star of David, it was a primitive devil or, more intelligent, snake biting its tail. This is what the Ouroboros looks like. an occult symbol of the infinity of the cosmos. Ed. For hours communicating with the saucer, I persistently asked if this was my subconscious, if not my second self, to which I received very evasive answers. After the sessions, I felt inhuman fatigue, as if I had been carrying heavy bags all day. But that couldn't stop me. This went on for 2 or 3 months. The saucer sometimes gave very curious and practical advice about my daily life, relationships with friends and superiors, but I hated such grounded use of the invisible, wonderful companion, whom I persistently asked about nothing more. Nothing less than about the order of the universe and salvation humanity. In the end, in response to my annoying questions, I began to receive obscene language. This sobered me, and I gradually gave up my addiction. Why did I show these strange mediumistic abilities, although in my family, as far as I know, no one was doing anything like that? Due to my deep spiritual ignorance, not only did I not think about the essence of what was happening, but I tried to quickly forget the unpleasant incident, forcing myself to return to the fold of serene materialism. The first trial experience of lack of communication made itself felt 10 years later, when in the mid-80s, like weeds in a spiritual wasteland, semi-underground oriental circles and salons began to bloom like weeds in a spiritual wasteland, gathering intelligentsia. Preoccupied with how to break out of the gray and dull stagnant reality to the true knowledge. From vines to humanoids. By that time, I had already managed to learn the so-called biolocation, or, as it was called in ancient times, dowsing, the method of identifying underground sources, fossils, etc. Using a metal frame or an ordinary V-shaped branch. No, I did not look for ore deposits, but I read with enthusiasm about the industrial application of dowsing in geology and archaeology. I was taught the method by a serious scientist, a candidate of technical sciences, which caused him full confidence, but in a very original way. When I honestly tried to determine the size of the aura of the tree and nothing worked out for me, the frame, instead of pushing off the border of the aura, rested against the tree trunk. My teacher took my hand to energize the weak biofield. As I realized much later, at that moment something like a devil's transplant, which supervised this scientist, took place into my trustingly opened consciousness. Naturally, I did not think about any demons then. They were mythical creatures for me, heroes of fairy tales. I also had no idea about their intrigues. But I began to fully enjoy the suddenly revealed in me the ability to biolocation. My husband and I, like children, with delight they hid and found various objects, determined the color of cars in closed garages, water pipes hidden in the thickness of the earth. We introduced children to this activity. Together with them we looked for places of ancient estates and even, they picked mushrooms, quite successfully, by the way. After reading the descriptions of classical dowsing with the help of a branch, I somehow cut off a forked branch and, clutching its ends in my palms, walked a little absent-mindedly around the yard. Suddenly the vine in my hands trembled and in the area of the sewer it sharply pecked down. Frightened by surprise, I clamped her ends tightly in my fists. But the force rotating the branch was such that it twisted and pinched the skin on my palms. Despite my best efforts to hold it, the vine began to rotate between my palms with great force and speed. The delight of the discovery extinguished the remnants of critical thinking. How can a weak biofield, even if it existed in the form it is described, with incredible power to rotate a frame, a branch, just as a heavy pendulum can swing a gaze? For a believer, everything would be clear here. But for me at that moment something else was clear. I received experimental confirmation of the action of forces unknown to me, field, as I believed. The devil suggested to me, try it, it turns out, you see how interesting it is. I enthusiastically agreed, not at all thinking about the fact that there is a real speculation on my materialistic worldview, that with the help of experiments they lure me in and now they can convince me of anything. I experienced convinced of the existence of UFOs, several times together with other people seeing them in the sky in the form of glowing dumbbells and bulbs. I sent mental impulses in their direction and received answers in the form of intensified pulsation of plates. Having collected a fair amount of statistical material about contacts, having visited several landing sites, having written several articles on these topics, I fervently believed in the manifestation of intelligent alien life on Earth. As a rule, various types of spiritual substitutions, cleverly designed by demons psychologists for every taste, are not very connected with each other. But at this moment in my life an event occurred that, from a materialistic point of view, united these and many other phenomena. I got to a meeting with a psychic who called herself a bionic of international class, talked about the miracles of diagnosis from photography, as if jokingly identified the ailments of everyone, gave advice, taught to see auras. You can generate the color of your aura to heal your loved ones with it, and the healer, joining the spread fingers of her palms under the table, where it was darker, slowly, with effort, began to part them. Against the background of the twilight between the fingers, first greenish and then pink stripes flickered, similar to luminous flagella. The audience roared with delight. May I try? I approached the bionicist with hope. Try it, my dear, by all means try it. She pierced me with a searching look. Instructed by her, I began with an effort to visualize first green and then pink light emanating from my fingers. And when I saw the same glowing stripes, but already emanating from my fingers, my delight knew no bounds. It worked, it worked. You are not a medic, child? The healer asked. No, I was confused. It's a pity. You have a very strong biofield. If you were a physician, I would have taken you to my group. You would have achieved excellent results. But I only train doctors. So, and Bionic expressively threw up her hands. Why did I have a strong biofield? What it is? With what power did I generate the luminous aura? These are the questions I never thought to ask myself. Without God's grace, which a person receives in the sacraments of the church, I was then far from the church. I was not protected from the influence of demonic forces. The connection of evil creatures, which every Orthodox Christian knows about, I took for a miraculous disclosure of some kind of mysterious abilities. I was worried about only one thing, the desire to learn at least a little of what this amazing, pretty, affable woman can do. Can I just see you? I asked hopefully. Of course. Bionics is open to everyone. So I unexpectedly got a teacher, and the lady who came to me was a faithful and ready-to-perform student. How to become a mediator. At the very first meeting with a new acquaintance, I told her a 10-year-old story about my spiritualist communication. She anxiously and strictly explained to me that this should not be done in any case, that I went to the lower essences, she called them Kamarupa, which could cause serious harm. But if I want to do a real thing, I can become a mediator. This is much higher than a medium, since the mediator communicates only with higher powers. You can read about this in Helena Rorica's Agni Yoga. Someday I will be ripe to discover these books. Now I see how selectively and subtly the demons acted, playing on my curiosity, the thirst for disclosure of abilities, on pride. Even my materialistic needs were fully satisfied. The teacher, or, as I began to call her in the Oriental manner, Guru, painted exclusively scientific pictures of what was happening. Thought, as she explained, is also matter, only subtle. And the aura is material. And disease is a kind of matter, or rather, energy that can be influenced, removed like a stocking. So, if you wish, you can learn how to actively control all these processes, enter the subtle world. A delightful prospect of unlimited knowledge and tremendous possibilities opened before me. Where all anomalous phenomena were explained surprisingly simply, the manifestation of matter not yet investigated by science. From that time on, information about all sorts of anomalies began to flock to me as if by itself. First contact. Somehow, among the UFO literature, I came across a description of an unusual way of contact with the higher mind, through automatic. Some letter, or psychography. After reading the description of the technique in detail, I decided to try it on myself, thinking that, unlike the devils under the saucer, this method can be used to reach real contact. I sent hot mental messages to our brothers in mind, begging them to respond. She put her hand on a blank sheet of paper with a fountain pen clutched in it and began to wait for revelations. I had to wait about 10 minutes, during which I tirelessly called out to the brothers. After about 10 minutes my hand trembled as if reluctantly and began to draw some letters on a sheet of paper in an incomprehensible handwriting. But, Strange to say, mentally I knew what the hand was pulling out. I was informed that my interest was noticed, that I could learn a lot of new and useful things for other people. Having covered 15 pages with some unimaginable writing, I could not believe that the humanoids so easily came into contact with me. And although an hour later I could not make out anything on the sheets, except for individual letters and scraps of words, I could not even remember what exactly was dictated to me. There was a delightful feeling of upcoming discoveries. From a huge stream of words, one phrase was cut into my memory. Go, right, the paper is already waiting for you, the teachings of the magician are singing in your words. So I once again fell for the, try it as it is interesting, lure, but this time disguised as a pragmatic higher mind. What I was experiencing seemed so real, and most importantly, scientific. This interest turned out to be much more lasting and fruitful. For several days I covered the sheets of paper with different handwriting, as if involuntarily moving my hand. It felt as if my body did not belong to me, as if it was a shell used for some purpose. Then the character of the messages changed dramatically. I began to write, albeit very quickly, but in my usual handwriting, returned to my usual, normal state and began to receive very clear and interesting answers to all my questions. Moreover, first the thought was invested in me, and only then or at the same time I wrote it down. I wondered if I was dictating these messages to myself, from the subconscious. This contact was so different from the descriptions of the auto-writing, in which a person often does not understand what he is writing, as if someone takes possession of his hand. The answer to the doubts greatly flattered my pride. I lead with your hand without fear, that you will not understand me properly. You will receive an answer through your heart if your question, devoid of selfishness, can interest the brothers. After all, you are not a goat, not a robot. So that your hand can be moved. Your path to unity must be comprehended. We will awaken living thoughts in you. Living thoughts, to my complete delight, took the form of poetry, and answers to even the most prosaic questions about humanoids, about the moon, about the essence of familiar things were given either by rhythmic prose, or by very good poetry, or even by well-honed sonnets. Moreover, it was dictated everything with such speed that sometimes I did not have time to write down the sonnets pouring down on me, and the pencil tore the paper. As a person who received some gift of speech from God and suffered greatly from the inability to publish a book of his poems, in Soviet publishing houses, young poets waited for their turn for decades, managing to grow old, if in some way, often incompatible with morality. They did not find a way to the hard high patrons. I was able to appreciate the quality of the poems dictated to me. Of course, I connected this with my modest talents, which, as I was sure, would now fully help me to reveal and realize my brothers in mind. So the calculation of the crafty was very accurate and hit the mark. I was jubilant, believing that I had found a gold mine of creativity, that I had touched the cherished caches of the information field, the noosphere, described by Vernadsky. What is happiness? Sing earthly songs. When are chords more wonderful? But my poor land. They created from my heart. And I drink the bitterness of the earth. So that others have given her to open. Poems like this, which appeared in great numbers on paper, made me, as it seemed to me, the happiest person in the world. But the most important thing, now I knew, life will not end with death, it will continue in the unknown there. And this vague acquisition of the meaning of life, unthinkable for a materialist, turned all my foundations, made me recklessly believe any information emanating from that life. I am led, enlightened, carried. I began to zealously follow the advice of the invisible leader. Maybe I would not be so gullible if it were not for one case that convinced me of the truth. Advice dictated to me on paper. Sometimes, when there were changes in atmospheric pressure, I suffered from a severe headache. A spoonful of brandy or wine and tea helped to get rid of the spasm of the cerebral vessels. But once, when I tried to get rid of a painful headache in this way, to my horror, I not only did not feel any improvement, but my condition became so bad that it seemed to me that I dying. Something bad is about to happen to me, I said to my husband, falling on the sofa. The trouble with medications around my person did not give anything, and instead of calling an ambulance, with all the forces of my being, I called for help from my brothers in mind, for some reason believing that they were obliged to help me. In just a few seconds, I felt a wave of some currents penetrate me from the crown to my feet. My body vibrates slightly, and something comes out of me through my feet, as I thought, my disease. Instantly healed. How could it have occurred to me then that it was a performance well played by the aliens? I jumped to my feet. Every cell of my body was overwhelmed with some kind of strength. I felt extraordinary vigor, a surge of energy, a readiness to move mountains. In a fit of gratitude, I jumped out into the street, dragging my husband along with me. Raising my hands to the starry evening sky, I warmly thanked the saviors. And I received an answer, a new portion of energy, which I felt as descending on me from above, as if I was standing under some kind of starry shower, washing every cell of my body. The next morning I received a message in which it was said, "You can't even think about alcohol, for the sake of allegedly, that I should keep my biofield clean because of the work I took on." Mindful of the miraculous healing, from what? Could I have felt so bad from a sip of dry wine? Of course, I solemnly accepted this advice. And my husband and I decided not to take a drop of alcohol into our mouths, never and under any circumstances, not for the sake of abstinence, but for the development of certain abilities. Then followed advice never to get irritated, since irritation accumulates in the nerves imperil poison, which is never removed from the body, not to eat meat, poisons in meat also poison my aura. I also accepted these advice, at least about meat. I could not cope with the irritation, although it seemed to me that I was becoming more generous. And this fast was not at all difficult, we did it playfully. Years later, after repentance, when I started just to observe the rules of orthodox fasting, I felt how difficult real fasting is, what efforts of will even small self-restraints require if they are done for the sake of God. Because in this case demons do not help, but interfere with every effort of the fasting person. But then, inspired by successes, I became very suggestible, flexible in relation to those who were leading me. From somewhere all sorts of books and manuscripts appeared, giving methods of how to be led. I enjoyed doing a very strange exercise hanger, where I had to feel limp hanging on invisible hangers for clothes, to imagine how some invisible hand carries me along the street, around the house, and I just humbly move my legs. And the more I relax in this state, the more relaxed and submissive to the external will I become, the better, supposedly, it will be for the energy of my body, which will gradually become more and more weightless. Ultimately, the weight may disappear altogether. In fact, my will and ability to soberly assess the situation disappeared incredibly quickly. And I volunteered to train as best. Slap in the face for ufologists. Of course, I could not be alone for a long time with the happiness that had fallen on me. I showed my psychographic contacts, comrade UFO researchers, which led them into great excitement. They assured me that I had a fundamentally new level of contact, because with a minimum of technical details, which other people receive, I am given a maximum of ethical attitudes and principles, which has never happened before. I was persuaded to conduct an experiment, a psychographic session, in a room filled with people, and try to receive information not by hand, but directly onto a typewriter in order to save it in several copies. To everyone's surprise and joy, everything turned out to be the best possible. Deep information about dolphins as animals of the higher, fifth race, with telepathic and other unusual properties was accepted. A kind of conveyor was adjusted. In poetic form the Star Brothers answered through me the questions of interest to researchers. Details were given about beta substance, Tyrian alloy, the seventh state of matter, governing the universe, about alpha emptiness, about psychotrons, space cleaners. My pieces of paper were immediately taken apart in order to be reproduced. In one of the collective, psychographic sessions, the table began to vibrate violently under my hands. Not knowing that this is one of the signs of the presence of a demon, I was very happy with the additional signs from above. If you want, UFO is a test for the maturity of souls, for the quality of thinking. You are not looking there, brothers. Contact is possible only by mutual exchange, and not by dull observation. Once, when there was an active dictation, one of the researchers began to persistently inquire what kind of UFO was on the route of the Tallinn-Leningrad plane, and to seek to be explained to him under what conditions communication with aliens takes place. In response to the intrusiveness, The humanoids brought a very unpleasant surprise to the ufologists. The Star Brothers suddenly changed the tone of the conversation, calling all the traditional searches, studies of UFO landings nonsense, and, as it were, casually dropped the phrase, "It is so pleasant for us to fool fools, look at the newspapers, seeing emptiness." We are generally invulnerable for people, stating that one should strive only for spiritual contacts like mine. The next portion of the teachings looked very mocking. All your experiments are a game of learning. Why would you catch a UFO? Do not be surprised. We do not give formulas, not for articles and vulgar dissertations, words about life, life with an I, calls for the light of the solar brotherhood. First, form a higher soul and take off your boots before entering. The puzzled saucers were forced to politely agree, mumbling something about the fact that they themselves see the low efficiency of research of landing sites, that it is necessary, indeed, to go to a new level. After that, I received another message from humanoids, very frank in a mocking attitude towards people as inferior beings. Analyses of evidence will not add anything more to human knowledge. That is why we heal with illusion, with the inconstancy of our incarnations, so that you can understand. You cannot measure the space of the immense worlds with a ruler. Not to ghosts, turn to the teaching and make contact through the spirit. So tell your ufologists, be clear, my friend, and untie your heart so that you can rise to contact in the subtle body. We will show our help there in practice. After all, a disc, a plate, a stone are all one. Conceals an invisible seed. But you, not seeing its crystallinity, felt the wind until now. And the truth looks at you point blank. After all, a blind man does not realize the color until he fully sees. I'm not talking about offense, for business. And if you don't understand, well, that's your business. Who was this message for? Ufologists were seriously offended by him, obviously, believing that it was my fault that I could not become a serious contactee. Or maybe the games of aliens have become boring for the crafty and they have other goals. Who are you, Guru? One way or another, but since then my alien contacts somehow imperceptibly began to decline. The humanoid, unknown to me, who educated me so thoroughly, was transformed simply into a teacher. And although I persistently inquired about his name, he stubbornly refused to identify himself. We don't give names. If you want so, October is my name. On another occasion, he even shouted at me in a picturesque way, "You didn't use the word guru in vain. You can call me a pen. I am still on Venus. I already live in the fourth dimension." Seeing that with persistence the answers become clearly meaningless, I stopped curious. Moreover, I entered a new stage, the greedy study of Agni Yoga, which I longingly typed on a typewriter, reveling in new knowledge. And in Agni Yoga, no importance was attached to names. It was suggested to just believe in teaching and teachers. Chants of the new fiery era, interspersed with pseudo-scientific messages about imperil. For example, a special substance that supposedly accumulates in the body during irritation, seemed like a really new word, a revelation. Behind the husk of exalted words about serving, to whom? Spiritual ignorance did not allow to discern the substitution and the worst falsification of spirituality. The Guru said that soon fire signs of my correct progress would be shown to me, and, indeed, a blue-purple asterisk began to run through the pages of the books I read, marking the most important places, in full accordance with how this is described in Agni Yoga. At especially crucial moments, a scattering of sparkling silvery stars flashed before my eyes. These are sparks of Fahad, the Guru confirmed, that is, the highest universal fire. From the portraits of the Mahatmas, great teachers of Shambhala, claiming to secretly rule the earth, light began to emanate unearthly beauty and brightness. In the center of the forehead, where, according to the occult ideas of the East, there is Agni Chakra, or the projection of the third eye responsible for clairvoyance, a screen began to appear, pulsing with colors of the subtle world and somewhat blurred images. Lights like flashlights started to flash inside my brain too. The third eye is opening, I received a comment. Deadly games. There were, however, and strange or even unpleasant phenomena. Once, when I was sitting in the lotus position, half of the The sofa underneath me suddenly lifted, and I began to feel perceptibly rocked. I was amazed, but not frightened. It was only curious. Another time I saw in a dream a pitch-black, impenetrable night filled with terrifying demonic squeals. Oddly enough, I was not scared even here. Such was my self-confidence, which, however, was not based on anything. But, most likely, the evil ones had no purpose to scare me. They probably wanted to play in front of me a comedy with the victory of the forces of light. In the same dream, the idea came to me to generate a bright light in my own head, and it obediently came out from my forehead, illuminating the road in pitch darkness. The wild squeals gradually subsided, and I got out free. What a spectacle my guru played after this incident. He praised me in every possible way for correct behavior in a dream, gave valuable instructions, encouraged me, quite in the spirit of the revelations of Agni Yoga, the heart is warm and free from victories over darkness. A space permeated with flame at least once is already luminous, quality of a fiery sword tempered, hone your spirit. I believe, you will do it. Joy is a sign of loyalty to the path, the guru argued. I didn't know then that this always happens at the first stage, and only then the wicked do not stand on ceremony with the victims. Thus, confidence in the correctness of my actions was strengthened in me, as well as stupid fearlessness in front of the forces of darkness, a naive belief in. I felt a little uneasy when, during meditation, I began to feel something like a thin web, on my face, on my hands, on my forehead, after which a mesh net began to descend on me. Feeling a strong, unpleasant pressure on the crown of my head, I immediately stopped meditation, convincing myself that I was not yet ready to go to the astral plane. I did not understand then that these deadly games can end in primitive demonic content, insanity, or suicide. My comforter guru after every trouble calmed me. Do not be afraid, brother, your path does not tolerate evil. And a sensitive heart will predict any damage. It was only the flame of pure eyes. After all, it is a good sign. Shining stars hovered overhead in a multitude. And the dark light pressed, the sediment of thoughts. That inner sediment obscures the light, and there are no black thoughts in the stream at all. Moreover, the teacher demon rudely flattered me. As for the celestial stellar network, in moments of enlightenment it comes to genius people when a star speaks to a star. But this flattery did not bother me at all. I innocently referred it to all people to whom the highest source of inspiration can now open. But one day something happened, after which I was terribly frightened. I lay in the dark, as usual before going to bed, placing my palms as a hill over the bowl, the center of the chest, meditating on the fiery transformation of the world, mentally lifting my heart in the fiery bowl to infinity. Suddenly, instead of reciprocating pleasant streams of light, I saw that from one point in space, 4 expanding dirty brown pipes were aimed at my heart, inside which I felt a terrifying about. They did not cause me any physical inconvenience, it was just this about having over my heart. I was horrified, realizing that something terrible could happen now. Every cell of my body seemed to be ready to burst from an unbearable feeling, although I did not experience any physical pain, but it was some other, more terrible suffering. Realizing my powerlessness in front of him, I began to constantly cry out, Lord, God, God. I do not know why, but God did not reject the pleading of the sinner. The horrifying vision disappeared. And what, did I understand this lesson on the verge of death? Began to thank the Lord. No, the next morning I rushed to the paper again to ask the guru what it was. And, of course, I received a comforting answer. You have accidentally attracted the magnets of the etheric pipes, information channels. They contain the substance of special formations. Along them you can climb to heaven, and not trample in the lowest clear day. The vulgar way is to force them open. That means, to limit oneself by doing so, to isolate oneself within the framework of strange observations, to cut off the path for higher spirituality. If you can, be patient, everything will come at the right time. Until the lesson of purity is over. Ridiculous doubts dry up the soul. You do not listen to their slippery voices, but say, I believe in you and assent to the teaching, loving, the power of the above ability is always firing, everything is unusual there. There you are naked in front of the light. And every thought and every feeling a step there will transform into powerful currents that will sweep away or lift up. It depends on what you appear here with. If there are a lot of weights of doubt, dark mud, then the soul will sound dissonant. Only the one who is clean, as God, and as a crystal, transparent, able to touch in different spheres, it is harmless and beautiful to enter them. There is no limit on his way. Cleanse your channels. And I, an insane person, obediently began to clear the channels again, so that I could sink deeper and deeper into the occult mud. Later, I asked myself many times why the evil did not immediately take possession of my soul completely. Why did they retreat when I was afraid of something? Of course, this was the special mercy of the Lord, who hopes for my repentance in the future and does not allow the forces of evil to destroy me completely. But it seems that the crafty spirits did not touch me for the time being, and for another reason. The disinterested, enthusiastic fool, dreaming of participation in the improvement and salvation of the world, no less, would be very useful in the future in some messianic action, like the activities of the White Brotherhood. And for this they took care of me, so that I would swallow the poisonous bait as deeply as possible and, possibly, later on became their agent of influence. Someday you yourself will become a guru. So it was promised to me in one of the messages. The technical details of evolution were of little interest to me. I agreed with the advice, and you shouldn't. You turned to heaven in shock. It also seemed unnecessary to me to know about my past incarnations. Once I learned that in the Atlantean civilization, I was a priestess of fire by the name of Tunimina, having received my own portrait in a sample of a poem in the language of the Atlanteans, which I allegedly created to glorify fire. I calmed down on that. From time to time they threw in information that surprised me about my incarnations. Either they would call Catherine II, then Princess Olga, or Jeanne d'Arc. I must say that I did not believe this. After some confusion, what if? I tried to forget about the inconvenient information, as if it didn't exist at all. I didn't wonder if it's suspicious that teachers are telling blatant lies. My mind was so trained that I rather attributed it to the inaccuracies of my perception. But there were very few such obvious failures, since I was much more interested in the eternal questions of evolution, moral problems. At that moment it was not Buddha that was very close to me, but the so-called bodhisattvas, people who were freed, according to Buddhist ideas, from the chain of incarnations, but voluntarily reincarnated again in order to help the liberation of other people. This is probably why everything was done in order to establish me in the chosen path. Here are sample messages that shaped my dream. At the very beginning of the contacts, when I not only did not understand anything, but my knowledge of theology and even the wisdom of the East was insignificant, the demons-curators rushed to confirm me in the thought that thoting, which I was doing, was the highest of all. What can be in the universe? In the same way, from thought, the worlds began, matter, living spirit. Not an invention of miserable, insignificant slaves, who created a god for themselves. No, the spirit is the force, the basis of the foundations leading to the Star Brotherhood. And you fully possess this power when your heart is in sacred fire. From this lesson I was obliged to conclude that the miserable slaves created a god for themselves, who is worshipped in the temple, while in the sacred fire I was given to master a completely different, higher power. At that stage, I learned it completely. But after all, conscience could speak, the voice of God in every person, even in a materialist and an atheist. In order to drown out the voice of conscience, it was given the name former I, the shell of ego. They say, you are worried about only the unreleased egoism, yourself, subdue the resistance of the former I. Your obsolete ego shells still hold the spirit quite tenaciously. And heavy karma is given for affirmation, for rejection of your selfhood. Prepare and refine your paths, you will receive the sign when you have to go. The illusion of freedom. In every way, my demonic teachers supported in me freedom of choice, the illusion that I could refuse at any time. Going back, knowing full well that a sinful human nature out of curiosity and a proud feeling of being chosen will not let me do this. It was suggested to me that everything is in my hands, everything depends only on me, on my free choice. I don't say that this path is easy. And I do not insist that you join him. But you asked about him. It is up to you to decide whether you will bend or not. when light will pour down with all the weight on your heart. How high you will see, loving, this, brother, depends only on you. What you wish, then you will know how you wish, and you will swim. Heaven is always with you, a sacred sign, in order to open the secret knowledge. And in every possible way the thought was affirmed that I should go on my way, not as an obedient slave, but as a proud person hoping for the great powers that were revealed in me. But remember, the Guru is you. You are your driver in the universe. And I will come to you at the appointed hour, when the need will actually be in us. They promised me direct contact in the future, when the image of the Guru comes to my heart, but before that I had to grow. And so that I would not be frightened and not embarrassed, the following structure of the divine hierarchy was proposed. Each person plays the role of God for others, lower ones. The role of the creator and leader. We are deities for the initial atoms, for us others will be deities. We know for ourselves the teachers, adherents of the plasma fiery world. The seventh rays produced them. And above, for the consciousness, the transcendence. Each person fulfills the role of God for others, lower ones. The role of the creator and leader. We are deities for the initial atoms, for us others will be deities. We know for ourselves the teachers, adherents of the plasma fiery world. The seventh rays produced them. And above, for the consciousness, the transcendence. Each person fulfills the role of God for others, lower ones. The role of the creator and leader. We are deities for the initial atoms, for us others will be deities. We know for ourselves the teachers, adherents of the plasma fiery world. The seventh rays produced them. And above, for the consciousness, the transcendence. I was delighted, so, it turns out, how one should understand God, to realize oneself as God, which means to understand the divine of one's capabilities. It did not even occur to me that this is a false ploy to inflate satanic pride in me, so that I get used to the idea that it is possible to be a god for others, since the demons themselves cannot have any higher teachers, they cannot recognize no one above themselves. Their deity is self-intoxication. But in front of me they tried to look humble, able to appreciate another person. Your attention is dear to me when you give your heart to heaven. And, as a reward, instant mental contact with everyone you love, at any distance was promised. An employee will be great for us. There were also a lot of methodological instructions on how to prepare for cooperation. If you have to possess the power of the flame, then the employee will go to glory. Do not be afraid to cross the Rubicon and find yourself in the capital flame. You are walking right. But transform yourself boldly and implement practice. Be able to understand what you have become now and how you will break for us. We are not leading you for the sake of curiosity, not for some ghostly reward. Your spirit repeat. Then the time will come, and a lesson will suddenly spill over into action. And I eagerly touched the most different spheres of occultism, receiving valuable instructions for every step I took. I wanted to learn how to see auras, and immediately a hint came to me how to unwind the energy in my head in order to achieve this. Soon, at meetings, on the train, I amused myself by looking at the multicolored bells over the heads of people, trying to determine their character and thoughts by the color of the radiation. But I soon gave up this occupation, because for some reason it occurred to me that I have no right to waste precious cosmic energy on trifles. There were many such discoveries. As soon as I became interested in diagnostics from a photograph or a phantom, I immediately succeeded in making an accurate diagnosis over the phone to a woman I know, which made her horrified. When my daughter fell ill, at night I was awakened by strange ringing in my left ear. I took a sheet of paper, and the exact recipe for treatment was dictated to me: massage on certain acupuncture points, descriptions of passes with my hands, diet, an indication of what to look for in the future. To my amazement and delight, my daughter quickly recovered. But healing in itself attracted me little. I was going to just heal along the way, as I was told in one of the messages. It was more interesting for me to awaken consciousness. And an intensified awakening began. Through me, many people were given advice on how to live, how to pray, how to protect themselves from negative influences. That is how the guide for controlling souls turned out, to the delight of demons. I myself sincerely believed that I was helping my acquaintances in their spiritual ascent. Let her not go out into the crowds without protection. Let her wrap herself in a ring of fire, ready for the pricks of scoundrels. My acquaintances considered such advice on energy protection very valuable, especially since sometimes the method of protection was given by thickening psychic energy. I didn't think that this protection with the help of all kinds of cocoons, caps, bells, psychic covers, fire crosses and other so-called field shells is a chimera that does not protect from anything. In fact, this is a method of driving out demons by the power of Beelzebub, the prince of demons, Luke 11:15, which, of course, cannot be done. But the creeps willingly demonstrated the effectiveness of the proposed method. My mother suffered from severe demonic rain, plagued the household with ridiculous aggressive accusations. Once I saw in a dream that my mother had a black aura and that her heart was engulfed in a black flame. I told my bioenergy mentor about this, to whom I sometimes went for advice, but less often than before, since I was satisfied with the advice, heavenly gurus. She immediately described in detail how to shut the mouth of a black obsessor, from time to time, putting a glass cap on her mother, mentally sealing her mouth, and so on. Through psychograms I received more detailed clarifications. And, lo and behold, the mother significantly moderated her attacks on her relatives. Moreover, I managed to stop her with the help of the mental flame in the midst of any scandal she started. I was so grateful to my mentor for help that I was ready to pray for her. No thanks. Teach this to other people. Your pay is good for people. It was this unselfishness of my mentor that made me believe her recklessly. She never took money for treatment and other help, except that she accepted flowers and enthusiastic praises. But the devil can arouse in a person another kind of self-interest, a thirst for glory, worship. Everyone who surrounded this charming woman saw this little flaw in her. She literally begged for praise, putting herself at the center of all events, but they willingly forgave, since she showed this popularity in a childish way directly and offensively for others. The help from her seemed to be so generous and effective. No one suspected that all these energetic victories over the enemy were nothing more than a kind of demonic performances that sometimes must be successful, otherwise who would believe them? Some demons subsided, ceased to manifest themselves in a person, to give way to others, the worst. Most often, after the next healing, many experienced very big troubles. But few people associated them with the action of a psychic or the use of energy protection. This was a reason to come back to such an omnipotent bionic. Can you negotiate with demons? My weight also grew in the eyes of my friends. I was asked to ask my guru for advice about raising children, cleansing and sanctifying the house, and many other their problems. Once I got into a situation where I had to deal with a man who, after a terrible enemy attack, was on the verge of death. During meditation, Christ appeared to him, and the man realized that he was doomed to suffer eternally while looking at him. For long hours he was in impenetrable hell darkness, where the icy eyes of Christ looked at him. From my eyes, I realized that it was not Christ, but Satan, he said later, and began to pray. After that, Christ looked at me with such longing, as if asking, "Can I be saved?" I woke up on the floor in a lotus position, although before that I was on the bed. Do you think you can pray for Satan? After all, he is so unhappy and also needs our love. With such a terrible temptation, it was imperative to go to the temple. But I didn't find anything better than to turn to the teacher for advice again. He burst out with false regrets about the fall of Lucifer and the reasons for his terrible mistakes, that he had no will to unite again with the Brotherhood of the Stars. Streams of lies poured out on us, and he appeared in the guise of Christ, because secretly he did not cease to strive for the subtlest and the highest in anguish. But it is not for you to make that pride cry with your heart, to glorify the Lord. Do not follow the path of Lucifer, do not heal his long-standing pain. Understand and support his secret striving for God, in which he does not even admit to himself. But the Brotherhood does not lose hope, the centuries are yet to come. The heart of an apostate can be reached. But not for you. Although with your mental, heartfelt support. Needless to say, what such support could turn into what a terrible temptation I would have drawn my neighbor, What an abyss of delusion such an unreasonable zeal could end. Spiritually blind, we had no idea how terrible the reality of the demonic world is, and amused ourselves with pity for Satan himself, who was frivolously perceived as a fighter in the ring with whom one could negotiate peacefully. Child of a doubtful age. Has doubt never crept into my soul? Of course, doubts arose at some moments, because the voice of conscience could not be drowned out to the end. What energies! But I was reassured by such sensible advice. Do not take magic and do not stain your heart with a black book. Pray fervently to the light, in fact, to Lucifer. There were also provided for other, heavenly answers, to inevitable doubts, O you, child of a dubious age. It's time, having tasted knowledge, hear God, comprehend him with a strict mind and heart. That higher, to which you are subject, comes to the heart at a change of times. Do not close the doors with revelation. Let no doubt touch the hearts. The Creator does not doubt the creation. The sprout does not doubt its striving for the sun. The lies of doubt have no pure hearts. So I was taught to recklessly believe any information under the guise of my free choice. The doors of the heart were opening ever wider for the enemy. And the time has come to try to convince me that we must turn away from the old truths, forget them. Those who are bold are pleasing to God now. The heart is meek, and the spirit is like a fiery voice. There are many superficial, ways in the world. In the former truth to go, to suffer 100 losses. For open ready updates way. You are among the first. And you be a warrior of God. No, there is no time for meekness, which I was taught to understand as humility before my teachers, because something grandiose was being prepared. Yes, the boundless period of asceticism is near. Like a cross, you will carry your love. Prepare your spirit for great frontiers. Already the messenger goes on the road. Prepare to open yourself to the earth and God. How I was commissioned to glorify the Antichrist. What was going to happen? Why and how should I open myself to the earth? The tension was built up from message to message. We want to unite in you. We are two paths, separated. Everywhere to this day. But a new shrine is being created. And it is indescribable to grow in it. What you know yourself, then convey to the earthly, yourself overflowing with the light of the other. Seeking in everything fusion, unity, believing your insights. So help the earth not to repeat the path where the dried heart is burned by thoughts. So, no more and no less help the earth. I was urged to look at people with wise eyes, not an all-forgiving person of their delusions, but a master of pure forces. Naturally, pure in the understanding of demons. Ready-made decisions were already made for me, the teachers asserted. They know what I have chosen, how I will follow them. You have chosen the path of a sharp spiral. Your sparks will ignite hundreds of souls. You do not break this covenant. From your overflowing cup, pour out the light on humanity. All those who are fiery in heart will come to you, and have pity on the rest with your heart. Having experienced many types of demonic spiritual experiences, having fallen into a state that in orthodoxy is called prelist, I believed with all the strength of my soul the satanic lie about the fiery transformation of the planet. About the imminent arrival of the new era herald, Maitreya, the whole Agni Yoga, stubbornly repeats this. It was on the holy day of the nativity of Christ that I received the blasphemous message, on the arrival of Maitreya, where it was said, wait for Maitreya. His birth will be anticipated by a star in the sky. He will incarnate in the Immaculate Bosom, celebrating Holy Christmas. And the world will stir up, recognizing him. And you will help him to establish himself with your striving soul. He will not save by a miracle, but by enlightenment, not by sacrifice, but by the great cleansing. Unfamiliar with the New Testament, I had no idea that each of these statements is completely false. That the coming of Maitreya was predicted long ago in the Apocalypse, only there he was called by his true name, Antichrist. And I had to join the ranks of those who would sing enthusiastic hymns to him. The first of them has already been written, naturally, in collaboration with the demon. I think it will be useful to cite him as an example of how fiery false faith, fueled by pride, can be, into what abysses of seduction can lead. From the mountainous world, the radiance flutters. Maitreya. And it blows with joy. And eternity blows. Maitreya. You are the Buddha of things to come. You are fire-winged time. Once again the truths of the grain. Sao in awakened souls. Maitreya. Where are you? Guess. Don't try before the deadline. But the call is approaching. And I can hear the breath of rock. Here is a glimpse of a ray. You're invisible. Fiery messenger. Here is the rustle of a star. That is a pure song to come. Here's a palm to your heart. Like hello to a stranger. And fire splashes. Satya Yuga asterisk arrives on earth. Star love sword. Put it in our hands soon. And call to battle. Host of the coming century. Maitreya. Who was I destined to become in this army of the coming age? Believing in the false revelations of Agni Yoga, saturated through and through with a deceitful, demonic spirit, I was ready to continue writing it, and create the last, 13th volume, in Spectable, which the priestess of the new century, I had planned to write. But did not have time to write. Rurik. I have already accepted the first pages from the Brotherhood and prepared myself for the messianic role of the conductor of divine revelation to humanity. I was not going to put on my name, out of modesty, like Helena I. Rurikon, Agni Yoga, but I was overwhelmed with jubilation over the great mission that I was assigned to fulfill. This is not surprising, apparently. The same demons that dictated to Helena Ivanovna Rurik the intricacies of the Yoga of Fire were now preparing the continuer of her work. In fact, I was on the verge of spiritual suicide without realizing it. They do not return from such abysses. But great and incomprehensible is God's mercy to his fallen children. Fortunately, everything was limited to dreams and delights, although later, after insight and repentance, for many years I had to cope with the grave consequences of being in a spiritual trap. A very important role in sobering up was played by the sudden interest in Christianity, albeit ugly at first. I perceived Christ as one of the messiahs, but God's mercy ultimately helped to separate truth from falsehood, especially since in the depths of my soul I am everything. Still sincerely tried to find the truth, to understand everything. How Christianity discovered to me. In this search, I greedily touched everything that came into my hands. I spent weeks in the Leninka, immersed in puzzling, secret doctrines. Madame Blavatsky, read the descriptions of various healing systems, such as Niche and 7-volume Hygiene of Body and Spirit Yogananda, Kriya Yoga. Klitsovsky, Teilhard de Chardin, Besant, Vivekananda, Romain Roland, Burgunya, Zanoni. This is an incomplete occult gentleman's set of authors for the restless intellectual of that time. Among this stream I came across an apocryphal, heretical, or rather, openly occult, Gospel of Jesus Christ of the Age of Aquarius. Specially compiled in order to prepare the coming of the Antichrist in the New Age of Aquarius. But for me this was the first acquaintance with the literature about Jesus Christ. The seed fell on the prepared ground. By that time I had already come to the understanding that God exists, although at that moment I represented him in the form of the Absolute. I realized that I was looking specifically for God. Therefore, reading the Gospel of the Age of Aquarius was a real shock for me. It seemed to me that I understood the essence of the great sacrifice of Jesus Christ, taking it as the path indicated for each person. They say, Christ showed each person, and you can do the same as I did, and you can be resurrected. I was struck by the words attributed to Christ. I lived to show the capabilities of man. What I have done, all people can do. Go and preach the gospel of the omnipotence of man. Not seeing their anti-Christian essence, I believed the assertion that Christ must manifest again and again, in the flesh at the beginning of every age, and also that evil is a disharmonious mixture of colors, tones, or forms of good. I warmly adopted Christianity, perceiving it in my own way, adapting to the then understanding of the purpose of life and everything to become like God. Poisoned by Oriental philosophy, I perceived sin not as a deep damage to human nature as a result of the fall, but as an incorrect manifestation of activity, energy, they say, did not fulfill God's plan for myself. In such a situation, of course, there could be no question of any struggle with sin. The ideas of repentance were completely alien to me. I looked with horror at Orthodox prayers, where they talked about a sinful, accursed person believing that this was an unacceptable humiliation of the Creator and His creation. I was dictated to the most detailed answer to the question, what is false and true sin? For outwardly pious words, it was difficult for a spiritually inexperienced person to discern a substitution. Self-confident shepherds have no right to blaspheme the beginning of God in man. This is about the relationship between a man and a woman. And although it was mentioned about the sin of falling into matter without blessing, then a daring intervention into the very essence of church sacraments began, an unthinkable blasphemy. Her husband asked for the blessing of heaven for the great act of creation of a living soul. She is like a saint. And that wife, like the all-good virgin, may even pray in the altar. I was somewhat shocked to learn about the prayer of a woman in labor at the altar. And, as often happened, seeing an inadequate reaction to a too unfamiliar thought, the demons immediately softened the impression, assuring that the birth of children of chance is like a mortal sin, and that women must remain in monasticism until the grave sin is atonement. Unworthiness. I dutifully swallowed this statement in spite of all its savagery and senselessness, without thinking about what a woman would do in monasticism with a newborn child. In addition, from all this followed the conclusion that it is much better to kill an unblessed child than to give birth to one. And the blessing itself was interpreted from a clearly satanic point of view. Although the temple gives blessings power, the blessing from God's lips, through the Spirit, through an icon, through vision, or other heavenly sign, of course, above. Yes, an Orthodox person would be good if he receives a blessing from a vision and feels it, with fire or warmth that has poured into the heart. I didn't notice how, through pious messages, I was taken away from the church. A person doesn't need an intermediary between the heart and God. Not an ancient letter, even 1,000-year one, but the Holy Spirit you serve. Any church person will understand what spirit the crafty words call to serve. But then I took everything at face value. I prayed sincerely and fervently, in my own words, but the daring prayer was full of self-admiration, imbued with the spirit of Western Hindu and Buddhist missionaries, like Vivekananda, Yogananda, Ramacharaka. I prayed to God to give me a particle of His power, saying, "You are the ocean, and I am a drop, you are a flame, and I am a spark," agreeing to a bold and blasphemous statement, which, by the teachers of the East, was snatched from the words of the Savior Jesus Christ and applied to myself. Beloved, I and my Father are one. I began to come to church, even sometimes to confess and receive communion, having no idea that such a great sacrament must be carefully prepared. There was still no literature at that time. I did not dare to ask church people or priests about something. It also did not occur to me to confess my addiction to the East, to belief in karma, to engaging in occultism. I did not consider it a sin. Moreover, I was sure that after some time many priests would certainly grow up to my understanding of Christianity as parts of the more general and greater truth. Many of my acquaintances treated the Orthodox Church in the same way, as an egregor, which is very useful for the Russian nation, but at the same time they believed that there are higher truths. Some of them came to the church to feed on the energy of icons. I really did not like such a consumer attitude towards the shrine. But I also looked with regret at those who repented and became Orthodox. It seemed to me that they artificially limited themselves, rejected the great gift that was sent to them from heaven. Several unsuccessful attempts to speak frankly with church people confirmed me in this feeling. I came across a hostile misunderstanding, an aggressive unwillingness to even casually touch upon topics that were inconvenient for them. Fake orthodoxy. And what about my contacts? Since I did not have a confessor, and I didn't even know what it was, I continued. Law consult with the teacher. Not in the least embarrassed that he did not give his name, I was sure that I was led by none other than the Supreme Mahatma Maria himself. I turned to him in front of the portrait, where he was depicted in a turban. His eyes were burning, as I now see. It was demonic fire, and from the portrait, blessing impulses of lilac color emanated from the portrait. I must say that my teacher very sensitively reacted to the new, orthodox requests of my restless soul. The nature of the messages changed at once. Now it was the Christmas word of the teacher, the Sretansky word of the teacher, the Epiphany word of the teacher. But among the majestic words about God, about Christ, about the need to cleanse the heart from irritation with a subtle poison, indistinguishable for me, concepts were introduced that were completely alien, if not directly hostile to orthodoxy. For example, On the day of the sacrament of the exaltation of the cross, much was said about salvation. But this was salvation far from being in the orthodox understanding, unlimited will save the world. What is it? The infinity of Christian exploits or the infinity of Satanism? This was not specified. There were also outright falsifications. The Holy Spirit is in everything. Not in the fear of God, but in the love of God, man must abide. So Sergius taught. Naturally, Saint Sergius could not have such words, but how could I check? Another forgery. When it came to asking in prayer, the teacher warned me that asking God is humiliating. Moreover, for God himself, that in no case can you forgive anything, but only give or affirm. Take, Lord, my strength. Take, Lord, my love, etc. Affirm, you give it to me. Humiliation in request. And a lie. Approve, do not ask, this is higher. This is the path foreseen from above. Teachers asserted that the request will never reach God. Never ask for yourself or another specific person. This prayer is too small to reach the higher spheres. Its vibration is lowered. Strengthen yourself in affirming prayer. If you want to help another, read the mantra of infinite power, which you yourself will direct to help him. You are almighty. Don't diminish your strength. Do not be a humiliated applicant at the throne of God, a pitiful consumer of his mercies, waiting powerlessly for alms. Do not close your path to the higher power with limited, petty prayer. What God can, you can. Show only this power in yourself. Here it is, truly satanic pride, which they are trying to instill in the minds of those who begin to go to the temple. Probably, this is how they fall into demonic charismatic prayer. This is how many heresies, schisms, sects are born, from an unauthorized interpretation of Christian concepts. The benefits of sober doubts. But now I began to understand something on this lie. By the grace of God, certain absurdities of the messages that I would have attributed to the impurity of my receiving channels, and now she doubted the messengers, among the magnificent words about the substance of grace, absurd, even parody phrases suddenly began to appear. Eyes are open. The heart is not crucified. The teacher hears. The heel is vulnerable. It can be seen that it is very difficult for the crafty to resist the habit of laughing at people. While rereading past messages, I came across many mocking lines that I did not understand before. You put on a mask of virtue, it's not a sin to stay in a mask among cattle. The lines denying the act of creation were alarmed. Do not belittle either your spirit or your body, not a creature, but God. You will prove it by deed when you cross the invisible threshold. Countless calls for cooperation, promises of fiery reincarnations, salvation by infinity, and other mystical theosophical tricks have become boring and began to seem monotonous and verbose. In the home circle, where the creative intelligentsia, musicians, poets, philosophers, doctors, scientists, etc., gathered for thoughtful conversations and the exchange of spiritual experience, a crack also formed. The first lectures of our unofficial mentor, we modestly called him the Master, who translated various occult books about the arcana of the tarot, palmistry, apatlism, numismatics, hierosophia, onomancy and other wisdom of a certain order, from which, as the Master explained, these unique books were taken, caused a stormy delight and desire to write down every word. Further conversations puzzled. How to kill a larva is, of course, curious, but where can we apply this exotic knowledge in practice? The negative double amulet, presented to everyone, with the image of a black square and Kabbalistic signs on the back, to which we had to give unnecessary suffering and negative emotions, also raised a lot of questions. Why should you not be harsh with him, and you should be friends with him, because he is omnipotent? How can something negative be omnipotent? And the statements, the devil is an instrument of freedom. For the initiated, the devil is not a person, but a force created for good, which can also serve for evil, aroused complete rejection. I didn't want such good, and when I found out that one of the esoteric names of Lucifer is the Absolute, a very unpleasant question arose before me. What God do I worship and with whom do I contact? Am I being dragged into disguised worship of evil? What caught my eye was that I had not noticed in the previous messages, light does not cast a shadow. There is no evil in the world, just a shadow from solid bodies. The very thought of the weakness and smallness of our thought is blasphemous, thus belittling the Creator, and you yourself bet over everything, like a bird that God carry on wings, and many other phrases, where deception, speculation on the desire for selfless service to people, pride, ultimate egoism, substitution of concepts were hidden behind the external beauty. After reading in one of the letters to E.I. Roerich about, I remembered a case when they tried to introduce me to one advanced contactee. When I read several messages from space, I recoiled in horror. It was an obvious delirium of a madwoman who angrily threatened the whole world for not fulfilling the commands she had accepted. This energetic lady grabbed, it was, a stranglehold on me. What happiness, now there will be two of us. It was with difficulty that we managed to get rid of the unsolicited cooperation. I myself believed that I was taking information from a pure source, that I was not like this degraded woman who lives on tranquilizers and dabbles in drugs. I didn't want to see my possible future in her. And only now, with fear, I realized that such could happen to me. Another thing happened that helped me understand where all the great messages come from. I was introduced to a man who introduced himself as an Orthodox monk, an associate of the Prophet of the Mother of God John Borislavsky, from the Theotokos Center. The monk held a hysterical service in my apartment, during which he confessed all those present in a very strange way. Everyone had to write down their sins on a piece of paper. He burned these pieces of paper without reading them, accompanying the extravagant ritual with some howls. Then he blessed all those present to sew for themselves monastic robes of different colors, blue, crimson, turquoise, which supposedly would protect us from evil. In the end, he showed confidence, leaving for reading the last 2 volumes of Revelations of the Mother of God. Acquaintance with the Revelations led me to indescribable horror. Among the phrases filled with aggressive, bestial hatred for a woman as a devil and the source of world evil, among the ferocious calls to renounce relatives, I met the flattering arguments of the Mother of God about salvation, very similar to my psychograms. True, the Mother of God spoke out more extremist. She threatened to wind the guts of those who would not listen to her revelations on a stick. Apparently, the demons, doing one thing of seducing the gullible, in the messages dictated to different people, deftly adapted to the psychological characteristics of each. Returning the Book of Revelations to the monk, the nobleman, I said that the messages of the Mother of God cannot be this, that the addressee is in a state of deep delight, his mind and soul were possessed by some low essence, posing as the Mother of God. I didn't say demon, but the monk, having correctly understood my words, began to shower me with curses and curses, very reminiscent of the vocabulary of his patron, eyes. Return from the abyss. But it was not so easy to get rid of all the burden of delusion. I continued to believe in karma, or rather, in future human incarnations, where supposedly I would learn to love, taking turns living the roles of a wife, husband, brother, mother, son, etc. I drew my children into these crazy fantasies. It did not even occur to me to consult with any of the priests. I thought that they would not understand me. All this almost ended in the death of the people closest to me, turned into serious illnesses. The consequences of everything that happened for many years affected many people, and I deservedly bear many grievous sorrows even now. Of those who previously walked the ghostly higher path with me, few were able to come to God, into the bosom of the church. Someone from a half-Christian half-Yog became a fierce hater of orthodoxy. Someone fell into slavish dependence on Sri Mataji, getting so lost in the satanic jungle of Sahaja Yoga that instead of a cross on his chest he began to wear a portrait of this priestess of newest occultism. Others became embittered at the whole world, which did not understand them. One woman fell into psychic healing, was damaged by her mind, charges water from icons, makes orthodox horoscopes. Almost everyone has their own special, demonic fad. So the one who thinks that, having wandered in the darkness and realizing the mistakes, one can easily come to orthodoxy, he is deeply mistaken. Demons don't let their victims out so easily. How many obstacles stood on my way to the temple every minute, and, above all, my damaged, distorted consciousness, from which with blood I pulled out deeply alien and hostile concepts to Christianity. But, even realizing my delusions, for a long time I could not truly repent, go through the rite of renouncing the service of Satan. My pride and arrogance interfered. I knew too much to accept orthodoxy and simplicity of heart. I didn't like much about him, the seeming humiliation of a person, the ignorance of the priests, from whom I expected answers to my philosophical and occult questions. It was not clear to me why, for the mistakes of one and only life hell is supposed to, did not fit into the mind, poisoned by the occult, and much more. But one day, in response to my high doubts, one provincial priest said a phrase that shook me to the core. You can't go to orthodoxy holding the devil by the tail. How is it that I am holding the demon by the tail? I, who began to write articles against sectarians and occultists. Everything inside me was indignant and seething. But this shock turned out to be beneficial, for it helped to put a lot from head to foot. At the same time, while helping a loved one, I had to attend the so-called exorcism of evil spirits, from Abbot German in the Trinity Sergius Labra. What I saw and heard there, how scary, inhumanly howling, screeching normal-looking people at the moment when they were sprinkled with epiphany water, how the intelligent ladies shied away from the cross or viciously tried to bite it, showed me the terrible reality of power over the human soul of that evil, demonic power with which I, not knowing its true nature, so frivolously played deadly games. This was the biggest shock in my life. On that day, the intellectual husk of doubts flew from my soul, and I firmly decided that from now on my salvation is only in obedience to God and the Church. And even if I still don't understand something, later with God's help everything will fit in my restless heart. This is exactly what happened in the end. Today, looking back at this terrible, long-term path along the razor's edge, on which only the grace of the Lord saved me from death, I want to say to those who believe that through some personal effort, training, meditation, spiritual experience, with the help of mystical centers, scientists or magicians, with the help of revelations he can become more perfect physically or spiritually, find peace, health and happiness, do not believe. You are being deceived in the most primitive way. You are not told that evil acts purposefully under the guise of good. I wanted to come to God, but on false paths of self-affirmation I came to the devil, who, putting on the mask of an angel of light, pretends to be Christ. Entering this path, you do not know that you will have to pay for everything at the cost of an immortal soul and the lives of your loved ones. But you must understand that you will be responsible for your whole family, for what demons will you add to your children, grandchildren, and more distant descendants. I say this, proceeding from my own bitter experience, as a person who personally experienced the tragedy of deception, who was on the verge of death and found salvation in the Orthodox Church. And let the sincerity of this story help those who are still on the disastrous path to realize the truth. Matthew Varlamov, Doctor of Technical Sciences, Professor, why cannot the Orthodox see UFOs? Matthew Gennady Ivuk Varlamov, Doctor of Technical Sciences, Professor, Specialist in Radio Electronics, author of more than 350 scientific and popular scientific publications. For about 25 years has been engaged in the problems of scientific research of UFOs, the so-called unidentified flying objects. Despite a certain skepticism, these studies, starting from the 80s, were put on a completely serious basis. Scientists of various specialties, including radio engineers, opticians, physicists, geologists, representatives of the Space Flight Control Center, the military, specialists of the Ventowers sections named after A.S. Popov. M.G. Varlamov worked closely with the pioneer of scientific ufology in the USSR F.Y.U. Siegel. He studied the traces of UFO landings. M.G. Varlamov always tried to follow an honest scientific path. He developed a series of devices for radio engineering research of so-called landing sites in the Moscow region and other regions of the USSR. The military provided quite serious help to the scientists. On calls from the Kremlin, they allocated cars, or even helicopters, went along with the saucers. Enthusiastic researchers worked for free, for the idea, so there was a great desire to get to the bottom of the inexplicable. M.G. Varlamov made a lot of measurements on objectively existing traces of landings, looked through a lot of radar images, talked with radar operators, radar stations. Following this strictly scientific path, he, as an honest researcher, could not dismiss questions that were unsolvable within the framework of pure science. The scientist resolved his bewilderments by finding faith in God, being baptized, having come to an understanding of the true nature of the ancient phenomenon, which today most people associate, alas, not with the wiles of demons, but with an incomprehensible invasion of humanoids on our earth, or with manifestations of the parallel existing higher in relation to us civilization. How did this major discovery come about in the life of a scientist? How did he understand what exactly is hidden behind the phenomenon called UFO? This work is the last in the life of a scientist. In January 2001, on Christmastide, Matthew Gennady Evok departed to the Lord as a true Christian, guided by the church sacraments of unction and communion. With the work offered to the reader, he tried to fulfill his duty as a researcher and a Christian to the end. What is it from the point of view of an observer? UFOs, unidentified flying objects, are called luminous celestial bodies, most often in the form of discs or shields, balls, lances and torches, cylindrical or oval-shaped wingless objects, from the stern of which flames can be spewed out, which cannot be imagined as objects of human creation. This, the first, official, one might say, classification was proposed by Pliny the Elder back in 70 year of the 1st century AD and remains effective to this day. The basis for this classification was the sighting of about 100 UFOs during the period from the beginning of the 1st century to 70 AD. NS. In modern observations, it is these forms that are most often encountered. There are, of course, extraordinary, exotic phenomena in the form, for example, of a giant eye in a luminous circle, from which a powerful ray is directed to the earth. But these are isolated tricks of demonic forces, which mostly use the standard set of demonstrations for seduction. Is this a new phenomenon? Despite the fact that the Church has long known and described the impact of fallen spirits on humans, many of our contemporaries believe that UFOs are completely different and that they appeared, as Menzel claims in the book, On Flying Saucers, in 1947. When Arnold Kenneth observed 9 such objects in the Rocky Mountains. To understand that this is not true, it is helpful to take a closer look at some of the evidence from the past. In fact, even the term, flying saucer, itself did not appear today. It was introduced by an Italian monk back in the 16th century. And here are some even earlier observations. In the 15th century BC, a UFO in the form of a shield was observed over the numerous army of the pharaoh in Egypt for several days, which was recorded in the so-called Lyons Papyrus. Rice. 1. UFO in an old Japanese engraving. In 1556, a war of white and black UFOs was observed in the skies of Basel. See Fig. 2. Rice. 2. A medieval engraving depicts a UFO battle over Basel. 1556 G. Some UFO researchers have suggested that the engraving depicts how light, divine entities are fighting the angels of darkness, since the literature describes quite a lot of cases of war between two groups of certain heavenly forces. Should we take it at face value, as many do now? But in the Holy Fathers we find a completely different description of this phenomenon. It turns out that in order to deceive a person, demons are often divided into 2 camps. Some take the form of terrible black creatures, while other demons take the form of angels, and these 2 troops are allegedly fighting among themselves. And if a believer takes these white creatures for angels, supposedly driving away demons, not realizing that this is a deception, that these are the same demons who played the comedy of the struggle between black and white, then a conversation with the angels will begin, or in modern terms. In 1716, over the Baltic Sea not far from St. Petersburg, Russian sailors for a quarter of an hour watched the battle of 2 cloud-like UFOs, with smoke, lightning, rays of flame, and many bright fiery arrows. The sailors observing this picture felt a sense of horror. So this kind of deception is possible in order to attract attention. From these demonstrative demonstrations, one should distinguish true heavenly phenomena, when many soldiers watched in heaven a vision of the heavenly forces incorporeal or the Mother of God, which strengthened the military spirit, showed God's help in the struggle against the enemies of orthodoxy. Such a case is known on the Kulikovo field. A similar phenomenon is described in the book, Russia Before the Second Coming. In 1944, before the last assault on Königsberg, the commander arrived with priests, who served a prayer service, and then went towards Königsberg. The soldiers were terrified, thinking that they would be shot like partridges. And suddenly, the shooting stopped. The Germans fell to their knees, shouting, "Madonna, Madonna," pointing to the sky. They refused both small arms and artillery weapons. They began to surrender. This case turned out to be so unique that there was even a tiny note about him in Pravda during the war years. However, nothing was mentioned about the Mother of God. I had a chance to talk with 4 guys and a girl who served in the army during this assault. The girl said that she herself saw some kind of light cloud. Apparently, this happened to people who were unbelievers or doubters who saw a ball, a bright cloud or a foggy figure, and only some sincere believers saw the Mother of God herself, who overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, differs sharply from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc. Nothing was mentioned about the Mother of God. I had a chance to talk with 4 guys and a girl who served in the army during this assault. The girl said that she herself saw some kind of light cloud. Apparently, this happened to people who were unbelievers or doubters who saw a ball, a bright cloud or a foggy figure, and only some sincere believers saw the Mother of God herself, who overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, differs sharply from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc. Nothing was mentioned about the Mother of God. I had a chance to talk with 4 guys and a girl who served in the army during this assault. The girl said that she herself saw some kind of light cloud. Apparently, this happened to people who were unbelievers or doubters who saw a ball, a bright cloud or a foggy figure, and only some sincere believers saw the Mother of God herself, who overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, differs sharply from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc. The girl said that she herself saw some kind of light cloud. Apparently, this happened to people who were unbelievers or doubters who saw a ball, a bright cloud or a foggy figure, and only some sincere believers saw the Mother of God herself, who overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, differs sharply from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc. The girl said that she herself saw some kind of light cloud. Apparently, this happened to people who were unbelievers or doubters who saw a ball, a bright cloud or a foggy figure, and only some sincere believers saw the Mother of God herself, who overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, is sharply different from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc., which overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, is sharply different from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc., which overshadowed our troops with her Omophorion, and they took Königsberg. But the perception of even unbelieving people here, as in the cases known from patristic literature, is sharply different from the visions of UFOs. Angels and the Mother of God never appear in an unusual form, in the form of some strange, luminous people, etc. How UFOs affect technology, nature, animals, and people. Technique. All researchers are attracted by the real material traces of UFO sightings. There is more than enough evidence. Gasoline engines stall near the UFO, the glow of incandescent lamps sharply drops, the tuning is lost in the radio receivers and appears. Interference, the image fades on televisions, the operation of power lines is disrupted. In 1966, 20% of the U.S. territory was de-energized with a bright red ball that turned on the emergency power outage systems. Nature. At the sites of UFO landings and near them, inhibited plant growth is noted. Trees dry up, the content of chemical elements in plants changes, and strange changes in the structure of the soil, both physical and elemental composition, are observed. Animals and people. Dogs, horses, cows show anxiety, dogs whine and huddle in dark corners, horses and cows do not eat grass at the planting site. People have a feeling of horror, numbness, memory loss, increased heart rate, changes in blood pressure, possible headache, paralysis, electric shock sensation, overheating from microwave irradiation, exacerbation of latent diseases, as well as damage to the retina. Such a case was in Chatura, when several people observed a UFO for about 40 minutes, some a little longer, some less. As a result, many of them had severely damaged retinas, their eyesight really deteriorated, especially for those who observed the phenomenon as longer. Moreover, the very type of damage was characteristic of powerful radiation exposure. The consequences of this observation were investigated by 2 doctors and a candidate of medical sciences during inpatient treatment of victims at Monarchy, Moscow Regional Research Clinical Institute. Why are electronic devices sensitive to UFOs? Based on this case and many other manifestations of UFOs, which we will talk about below, at the level of our knowledge in the field of physics, it can be assumed that recently the so-called UFOs most often adopt a plasmoid structure, like ball lightning. Why? About this conversation ahead. For now, let's turn to the evidence supporting these assumptions. The fact is that material traces of UFO sightings remain, objective readings of radar devices that recorded UFO tracks on the screens, and complete nonsense was reflected on the screen. Imagine on a radar screen, a net that looks like a volleyball, and in its knots there are light circles. How can it work out? The scanning scheme itself does not allow obtaining such a picture, but it turns out, in spite of everything. When a UFO appears, radar images, interference, as in Fig. 3. The image of the negative of a similar cloud in the photograph of a radar display of a circular view, outwardly it looks like some kind of figure like a pterodactyl. A flare in the form of such a bird was recorded at altitudes from 900 to 3,500 meters, its area is about 7,500 square meters. km, and the maximum volume is about 20,000 cubic meters. km. The bird on the screen with a circular mark with a range of 100 kilometers, the diameter of the circle is 200 kilometers, was fixed for 20 minutes, then divided into separate fibers, which completely disappeared in the next 20 minutes. If it were a trace from some real flying object, then this cloud should have a colossal power, from which everything that is under it on the ground will burn out. But we see nothing like this on Earth. If we assume that this interference was created in the scanning unit of the indicator of a radar station, then its power can be of the order of thousandths of AW, while the creators of such interference can be demons invisible to us, humanoids. Rice. 3. Photo of the negative of the screen with a bird and markings of the rings with a range of 150 kilometers. What is the difference between aircraft and UFO radar observations? There are 2 main types of aerodrome radar systems, in the form of a combination of 2 radar stations. One is a circular view, which allows you to determine the direction of flight and the distance to the object. The other is an altimeter, which determines the height at which the object is located. Modern airfield radars combine not only the functions of 2 old radars, but also provide various additional information on the screen, for example, flight number, time, etc. Data. The experiments in question were carried out using 2 radar stations, a circular view with an operating frequency of 3 GHz and an altimeter with an operating frequency of 10 GHz. The marks from the planes on the display of the radar of the circular view had the form of semi-ellipses with an angular size of about 10 degrees, i.e. the farther the plane flew from the radar, the larger was the linear size of the half-ellipse, left part of Fig. 4. The real image photographed from the radar display screen is less clear than shown in the schematic figure, because it consists of several frames that give one general image. On the right is the image of a passive object, a reflector plane. The active object is a transmitter-emitter. If the transmitter frequency corresponds to the operating frequency of the radar, then we will see this active object not in the form of a half-ellipse, but in the form of a complete ellipse with a kind of crown. Since the size of the ellipse is proportional to the power of the transmitter, its dimensions do not change when the distance to the object changes. Right part of Fig. 4. This is exactly the picture we saw when a UFO hit the radar field of view. On the basis of such observations, a hypothesis was proposed about the plasmoid nature of some UFO manifestations. Since the density of plasma can be much less than even the density of air, the UFO, in this case, can be considered as a kind of plasma hole with a very low mass, which easily makes turns at right angles, moves at a speed of up to 30,000 kilometers an hour and disappears from the radar display screen if it slightly changes the generation frequency. These data are comparable to radio emissions of some types of ball lightning. This hypothesis explains some of the paradoxes in the appearance of UFOs and the behavior of their crews. But, like other hypotheses, it is incomplete and may be another crafty obsession. This experiment showed that UFOs that fall into the field of view of UFO locators have only the appearance of a physical body. From history, from the testimonies of the Holy Fathers, we know how ingenious there are demons, who are actually incorporeal. Spiritual nature, they can take the form of an animal, for example, dogs, as in the case of the great martyr Tryphon, an angel, a person, a humanoid, a spaceship, can materialize and dematerialize. It is very beneficial for them that lately the massive, objective scientific data is pushing even serious scientists to the idea of an alien invasion of the Earth. But if you honestly compare the results of various studies, it is not so difficult to be convinced of falsification. Rice. 4. Drawing of images on the radar screen. As the aircraft moves away from the radar, the length of the mark on the screen increases, although the angle remains the same. The dimensions of the plasmoid UFO remain constant, since the radiation power of the plasmoid does not change. Having discovered the plasma nature of the manifestations of the demonic world in the form of a UFO, it is easy to explain the incredible trajectory of the flight of the saucers. The UFO flies first in one direction, then sharply turns 90 degrees, then another 90 degrees. No normal object can do this. If this is a plasma clot, then this behavior is quite likely. This also explains the failure of various devices known to researchers near the appearance of UFOs, as well as at the places of their landing. Devices that set the accuracy in electronic clocks and radar indicators consume a meager amount of energy, in hours about 1 microwatt per hour, and in a radar about 100 times more. This amount of energy can come directly from the UFO or from the trail of its landing and will cause noticeable deviations in the readings of the instruments. At one time, when work was underway to study the fourth state of matter, plasma, I visited one of the laboratories where plasma generators and my sensors, which I brought there, stopped working. So it can be very useful to know some of the mechanisms of mysterious phenomena demonstrated by demons in the form of UFOs and other anomalous phenomena. It must be said that the presence of a person who is carried away by these phenomena, and especially a contactee, gives demons the opportunity to increase the effect of the impact on devices many times over. Sometimes UFOs appear as fireballs. When I went to the aviation school in Borisogledsk, there was a small ball lightning that flew along the street, stopped at some houses, knocked on doors or windows somehow rationally and flew on. And while she was changing her shape. It is clear that this is not a natural phenomenon, but demonic tricks. In the ufological press there were reports that some researchers saw horns appear in such a ball lightning, a manifestation of a face with an evil expression, which left no doubt about the demonic essence of lightning. It turns out that in the famous Anderson case, when one of the members of this family saw glowing men, these little men are nothing more than demons, who took the form of ball lightning. Such an interesting demonic ride. With such demonic demonstrations in the form of plates or humanoids, when the demons need it, they can manifest themselves in the form of plasma, and then they can deconsolidate, disappear, turn into nothing. The ball lightning disappears before our eyes, completely dematerialized. UFO contacts. Contacts and close UFO sightings include those in which the distance from them to the observer is from several to tens of meters. This happens during a UFO flight at low speed over the observers or direct observation from a close distance of a UFO sitting on the ground. Close observation of a UFO not only gives the impression of the complete physical reality of a celestial object, but it is possible to examine the ship's hull and its structural elements. It was even possible to photograph such objects on film, and even if we exclude cases of falsification, there is nothing surprising in this. The display of plasma phenomena is quite possible on photographic and even videotape. But the strangeness of these observations lies in the fact that it is very rare to get close to a UFO sitting on the ground, since a person encounters strong resistance, as if on an invisible transparent, protective shell. When trying to pass through which there is not only noticeable physical resistance, but an unpleasant feeling, from unaccountable fear to horror, which force you to abandon the idea of getting closer to the UFO. When penetrating inside a UFO, other absurd phenomena arise in front of those who, for their curiosity, were allowed to do this by demons. One of these rare eyewitnesses was the chauffeur who helped us in our research. Once he alone came to the garden to harvest. Sitting on his haunches, he was putting a carrot in his backpack and suddenly he heard a thunderous voice. He raised his head and saw a humanoid 2.5 to 3 meters in height, similar to a proportionally folded, European type of person, in a jumpsuit. The alien took him to an empty place and said, "Caution." Out of nothing, a metal ladder with an edging appeared under our feet. The contactee saw a cigar 8 to 10 meters long. But when he climbed into the plate, then inside it was, many times larger. And one more absurdity caught my eye, an old fireplace with modern buttons at the top, like on a TV remote control. And instead of an electronic display, a sheet of paper was pinned over the fireplace, on which some strange stars were drawn by hand, by the way. Then they tried to study the drawing of these stars abroad, and it turned out that they reflect the arrangement of stars in the sky at some very ancient time. On top of these frankly mocking absurdities, our contactee was asked to sit on the pilot's chair in the form of a kitchen stool. He stretched out his hand, but only tried to press the button. He was immediately turned 90 degrees along with the stool. When I began to analyze and compare these contradictions with dozens of other, objective observations, reminiscent of a stupid dream of a sick person, the results of contacts began to be assessed differently. There was an impression that all these contacts are not at all a reality in the physical sense, although they are perceived by the contactee quite real, but in fact they are pointed in a definitely image on the human mental. Having understood this, it was not so difficult to compare it with historical sources. I realized that the UFO phenomenon comes to us not from light, but from darkness. The assumption that the aliens had psychological protection from unauthorized access in the form of an invisible cap crumbled before our eyes due to the contradictions and absurdities in subsequent visions. In addition, strange pictures directed at a person's brain, causing him a complete sense of reality, can be explained by images from the subconscious and other factors. Are there any objective data? Landing tracks. At first glance, it seems that with the help of instruments it is possible to obtain objective data on the physical parameters at the UFO landing sites. UFOs that allow for multiple re-exploration. The technique of these studies can be presented in the following sequence: determining the exact coordinates of the landing site, conducting radiotechnical, crinal, cytological and other objective studies in the landing spot. Determination of the coordinates of the landing spot is usually carried out by ufologists by biolocation, that is, with the help of dowser operators. There are many reasons to believe that this ancient, little-studied method of searching for underground water veins, now used in geology, is associated with demonic influence. With the help of a rod, or its modern version, a metal frame, sometimes even with a soldered capacitor, they also received answers to questions, whether the contactee is deceiving or truly testifies. How, in this case, and through whom? Did the soulless frame confirm the state of a person's conscience? Radiotechnical sensors made it possible to measure the change in the frequency radiation in the spot and around it, which can be equal to 1 to 5% of the fundamental frequency. In the landing zone, the so-called crinal effects were observed, changes in the accuracy of the electronic and mechanical clocks, which, as a rule, begin to move more quickly in the spot. Cytological, biological and soil studies revealed a sharp decrease in the number of protozoa in the soil spot compared to the background, up to 10 times or more, a difference in the composition of potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen, from 3 to 10 times in the vegetation of the spot, etc. According to geophysical data, the percentage of a number of elements in the spot, in comparison with the background, may differ by 2 to 17 times. And if the data of the last 3 measurements are more or less objective, due to the peculiarities of microwave radiation at the moment when the devices are acted upon, as I have already said, presumably with the help of plasmoid structures. Then problems soon arose with the radio engineering data. An extremely interesting phenomenon emerged. It turned out that UFOs are not visible on every radar station, at the same time. On one range, they are visible, on the another range, they are not. We have even come to the approximate range of radiation that can be observed and which cannot be observed. But then what about the objectivity of the instruments? But the most striking thing happened with my portable measuring devices the size of a dictaphone, which recorded the change in the frequency of some circuit in the spot where the landing was. At first, I safely traveled with them to landings. We surveyed 7 places in the Moscow region, collected a lot of data, and began to systematize them. But somehow it happened that I could not go myself. And for the next study of traces of planting in the Pushkino area, in Legov, where the regional boarding house is located, I sent my student who lives nearby. It looked incredible, but on the same device, this student received completely different data than I had. And then I asked another person to take measurements, whom at that time was defined as a minusist, a person with a negative field. At that time I called people prone to occultism. The instruments showed no results at all. There was an impression that different researchers imposed some kind of addition on the same background. But I still could not explain why on the same landings the same instruments give different readings from different researchers. And what happened to the kernel effect, which Siegel called the Varlamov effect, in electronic and mechanical watches? When my son and I went to the Sharapova Okhota landing site, we got a very small, but clearly observed so-called frequency runout. Inside the spot the accuracy of the clock increased by 0.1%, but still this value was more than natural influences. Outside the boundaries of the spot fell again. This experiment was repeated several times and the frequency runout data remained unchanged. And when the researchers traveled to the Ems Triangle, near Perm, to the landing site known to the whole country, the author of a book about this phenomenon admitted that his hours had gone ahead by an hour and a half. Then I already began to understand something and thought, you are already so entangled by demons that it is easy for them to act through you and on devices. It was all amazing. A common strangeness of these observations was the dependence of the results on the personality of the operator. The results could differ several times. There was a bewilderment. Why can this happen with objective instruments? But when the level of errors dropped to small values, it turned out that in these cases the person influenced them much more. Of course, by itself, he cannot influence the device, but, as I later realized, the demons that circle around him can change the indicators of the devices slightly for one, and for the whole coil in the other. And so I doubted the results of such studies, in the possibility of objectively using science to investigate the UFO phenomenon, because only around the saucers did these absurdities occur with devices that usually worked objectively and without failure. When I determined that the object affects the devices and the radar itself, then I began to argue, why does it act this way? This means that this is not a UFO at all like a spacecraft. In this case, a half of an ellipse would be visible from it on the radar, but some other object. Radar observations were also convincing of this, when impossible, absurd things were reflected on the screen. A little earlier I already talked about this effect. As a result of these and many other cases, I realized that I was not researching the ships of messengers from other worlds. And although at first I did not think about the spiritual essences of the demonic world, knowing little about them, but the course of my research led to the fact that in 1991 I was baptized, and from that time a turning point began both in my scientific affairs and in my views. There was a feeling that all this work was mostly done in vain. The only useful way out is that everything boiled down to a simple explanation. These phenomena are from the evil one. This is important, the rest is irrelevant. Why is contact with humanoids harmful? I began to understand what is really happening with the so-called contactees who, through the humanoids, pilots or passengers. UFOs, in one way or another similar to people or their hypertrophied copies, enter into communication with the demonic world, which they themselves, of course, are not aware of. Almost all contactees are people who have suffered a serious illness or experienced a stressful situation. They quickly enter a state of contact, in which their voice, posture, facial expression can change. In this state, the contactee acts as a kind of telephone receiver or telephone, because often he himself does not understand what he is saying. Analysis of contactee information shows that it is 90% meaningless, fragmentary, jumping from one topic to another, contradictions mixed with generally known truths, etc. At one time, when Siegel and I were just starting this work, I told him, Felix Yuryevich, I will not collect materials about observations. You can't trust them. The phrase, lying like a witness, very accurately corresponds to the essence of this phenomenon. I will only deal with the traces of UFO landings. They do not fly away anywhere, they are always in place. Further research fully confirmed the correctness of these words. Forced to use some of the services of witnesses and contactees, we encountered very strange things. I myself was a witness and participant in the case when one of our contactees began to give out ridiculous information. As a scientist, I commented on what he said. Vladia, you are talking nonsense. Then Vladia, without changing his face and posture, said in the same boring voice, your contactee does not have a sufficient level of technical knowledge. But excuse me, what technical knowledge a telephone receiver can have? And in this case, a person in the role of a contactee is nothing more than a telephone, a transmitter of this very information. No UFO researcher can say that he receives reliable information through such contacts. Very rarely there is some kind of information at least outwardly of a higher level than the level of a student with a failing grade. And what is the point of informant demons, who, most likely, openly laugh at us, to give us some scientific knowledge? Is that in order to captivate, amaze with science, and then confuse again? It is impossible for a scientist to understand their messages. There is nothing scientific there. How do contactees feel during contact, especially when they first meet a humanoid? According to the descriptions, first impressions are curiosity, sometimes irresistible, which paints everything in a rainbow light. Contactees, as, indeed, any UFO researchers, usually go through 3 stages. Stage 1, I call it the first punch. I try to do it voluntarily. I am interested and good, so I will try further. Then comes the second stage. I do it not quite as I wish. Sometimes I feel good, sometimes I feel bad. This is the second hit. Time to stop and stop all doing this. But if a person does not stop at this moment, then he falls into the third lure, when he is already obliged to do what does not want. It is very bad for him, but he cannot escape, since the soul is already voluntarily sold, and himself, without God's help, do not get out. These 3 phases are not my discovery. In the Baltics, a certain psychic wrote 2 books in which she talks about the same 3 stages. 1, good, nice. 2, something is interfering. Indeed, if you honestly write about all these contacts, humanoids, then even the most interested persons have to admit, they are all built on the principle, try it yourself. The man tried one thing, he was good, tried another, it seems to be interesting too. And so slowly he is brought to the moment when his soul has already been sold to the devil. From here there is only one road, into blackness. Or to repentance, if the person nevertheless understood what happened to him. But to understand something, and even more so, to break free can be very difficult. All the contactees I saw were in a state of some kind of stiffness, numbness, and endlessly talked, said what they were told from the outside. One of the contactees, with whom we went to one planned landing site, he was informed in advance of its date, time, the names of the specialists who should have been invited, conducted the session as if he was receiving some kind of radio broadcast. His facial expression, posture changed, he turned pale, fell into a completely abnormal, detached state. Since the landing time was set at 2300 hours, but the UFO did not appear either at 1 a.m. or 4 a.m., our contactee began to ask, well, when will the UFO arrive? They answered him, in his words, as follows, your common angle is not the same, and especially this one, bespectacled, that is, mine. He has an abnormal angle. What this corner is, I still do not know. Maybe they were comparing the participants of the expedition, but it is quite obvious that I prevented them from demonstrating miracles, although my name was given to the contactee by them among the obligatory researchers who should come. I must say that at that moment I was already beginning to understand something. In my soul there was no inclination for all this crap, and although I was not baptized, one might say that at that moment I was a spontaneously believing person. This is probably why I very much interfered with the contact. That at that moment I was already beginning to understand something. I had no inclination in my soul to all this crap, and although I was not baptized, one might say that at that moment I was a spontaneously believing person. This is probably why I very much interfered with the contact. That at that moment I was already beginning to understand something. I had no inclination in my soul to all this crap, and although I was not baptized, one might say that at that moment I was a spontaneously believing person. This is probably why I very much interfered with the contact. At one time, many UFO researchers, having accumulated a large amount of evidence of so-called contacts, began to warn the population, run away from any contacts, they are extremely dangerous. This turn in the consciousness of researchers can be explained very simply. After all, contact is always communication, at some level, high or low. And an honest researcher cannot fail to see the extremely negative consequences of communication with aliens, or even simple curiosity, which ends in failure. Compare Motovilov's description of the feeling of the influence of the Holy Spirit in his conversation with the monk Seraphim of Sarav, with the stories of contactees about communication with humanoids. This is heaven and earth. And if in communion with God in prayer, during the appearance of the Blessed Virgin Mary to the saints, warmth, goodness is felt, and a person remains himself, can talk with others, then a person who has come into contact with humanoids, his face bends, his hands involuntarily move. He is like would be disconnected from the environment, the will is completely paralyzed. There are times when the whole person becomes paralyzed, as it were, and cannot move. That is, in contacts, there is a forcible submission of the will of a person by demonic entities. If we talk about any scientific value of the data collected by contactees, then it is practically zero. The so-called close observations of UFOs from the outside and from the inside are induced phenomena, a kind of waking dreams that most often show to one person, but it is almost impossible to verify their reliability. In addition, the information of contactees is almost entirely unreliable also because they are most often people who are sick in body and soul. What is the further fate of people who communicated with UFOs? I know a little about the real fate. But, as a rule, after the first contacts, imposed or arising out of curiosity, contactees either go deeper into the occult, since they may open up some abilities to destroy them and other people, or something happens to their heads and they are damaged by the mind. From the descriptions of UFO researchers, there are cases when, even after indirect contact with the contactees themselves and their loved ones, many misfortunes occurred. Why do I deny the alien nature of UFOs and other anomalous phenomena? About the ways of scientists. The paths of scientists are twisting and confusing, especially when investigating unusual phenomena. There are two ways to overcome these difficulties. The first is to accept an official point of view and from its position to praise or deny the phenomenon, and the second, by honestly and scrupulously studying the phenomenon, come to his explanation. What is missing in the first group of scientists? The latitude of the approach. The necessary breadth of approach is provided by faith in God and orthodoxy. We see how fruitful the work of scientists is who do not oppose science to religion. Igor Ivanovich Sikorsky, a Russian scientist, is known as the designer of the world's first heavy bomber, Ilya Muromets. He is the creator of the first transoceanic passenger liners, the founder of the world's serial helicopter industry and the author of books on theology. Academician Viktor Iosifovich Vanik, Belarusian scientist, author of fundamental works on foundry, many of which have been translated abroad. Author of the monograph, Thermodynamics of Real Processes, in which scientific and theological issues are intertwined in a single pattern, and the fundamental collection, Why I Believe in God. What is this, a whim, originality? No. According to statistics from the 19th and early 20th centuries, the overwhelming majority of world-renowned scientists believed in God. Among them are Voynitsky, Grimaldi, Descartes, Copernicus, Koshin, Leibniz, Lomonosov, Newton, Pavlov, Pascal, Tycho Udebra, Euler, and many others. Faith in God is necessary for a scientist. Faith in God is an integral part of the platform for studying the universe. Sikorsky, who in his childhood received an orthodox upbringing, summarizing the results of his practical work, observing life in Russia and abroad, gave an original interpretation of some important issues of theology. Vanek, having become acquainted with the works of Ivan Panin on the mathematical study of biblical texts, in his mature years changed the Catholic confession to the Orthodox and attributed all anomalous phenomena to manifestations of demonic activity. Without in any way equating myself with these scientists, and my work on the with the theological works of Sikorsky and Vanek, I will say the following. I began the study of UFOs from an atheistic and purely physical position, not from collecting observations about where, who and what saw, but from studying the traces of so-called landings, which remain on the ground and allow measurements to be repeated many times. This multiple measurements in the end, on mature reflection, made it possible to discover the influence of the researcher's personality on objective electronic devices. Almost simultaneously with Vanek, I was baptized into Orthodoxy and, getting acquainted with the works of secular Russian writers of the 18th and 19th centuries and with the patristic works of Christ's ascetics, I realized that only taking into account religious positions can one give the only clear and consistent explanation of anomalous phenomena as demonic cutting. It is simply impossible for the most qualified specialist, whose eyes and ears are restrained by demons, to reach this truth. He will not be able to understand this. Do contactees believe in God? Is it possible to say that UFO research in the form as they are now being conducted is a dead-end path, as some believe? It is hardly worth being so categorical. But it seems to me that scientists are missing the most important point, without which research cannot be called complex. Getting acquainted with hundreds of questionnaires of observers, I did not find a question about their religion in any of them. But here's what's interesting. I have been doing this business for over 20 years, and have never seen a flying saucer. Never. Not before he was baptized, not after. Probably because I myself, I think, in my soul, even before baptism, was in my own way, an incomplete believer. As far as I know, Felix Siegel himself did not see a UFO himself. He was a normal, honest researcher, a baptized person, although his research is somewhat one-sided. Academician Vanek from Belarus, whose life ended tragically, he was hit by a car while walking to the Temple of God. While he was still a Catholic, in the Elbrus region he saw with his own eyes a plague. And after he accepted orthodoxy, there were no visions. I believe that the answer to the question about religion would highlight the problem in a completely different way, would reveal very interesting statistics. Among those contactees whom I knew, there were no Orthodox Church people. Private samples showed that believers very rarely see UFOs, apparently, only as a temptation or God's permission for some reason. Plates do not come to them, humanoids do not communicate with them, because such people have a shield of faith, which closes them from unnecessary visions of the spirits of evil in high places. The grace of God protects them from the wiles of demons. And those who have forgotten the way to the temple and are poisoned by curiosity and the desire to see something can see not only UFOs, but also any other demonic miracles. It is they who become the preachers of the latest theories in the field of anomalous phenomena. It is interesting that in the first ranks, except for rural stove makers or housewives, there are doctors of philosophical and psychological sciences, who famously solve all technical, physical problems. Candidates of technical sciences and graduate engineers, abandoning their main business, solve, first of all, parapsychological problems, and then, in passing, tackle questions that are in no way lower than the problems of the universe. Such is the devilish temptation of scholars who have fallen into superstition. Why is it important to write about it now? Why is it especially important to write about this right now? The fact is that before there was more faith, and there were fewer demons on earth. Now that huge masses, people are not just in disbelief, but actually serve the demonic world, the demons are especially unbelievable. To catch human souls, as in a war that is nearing its end, both old and small are mobilized from the satanic ranks. Now demons supervise the main direction, all mass media, and first of all, electronic. The overwhelming majority of television and radio channels are in their hands. Therefore, streams of crafty half-truths erupt into our eyes and ears, which are difficult to immediately understand. It is difficult to separate truth from lies. The same thing happens with newspaper, magazine, and book editions, which sometimes allocate up to 80% of their area to false information, preaching free and safe sex, rock music with demonic choruses, information about mental flights to other planets to our older brothers, humanoids. Where to look for the truth about anomalous phenomena? In newspapers, magazines, books. Newspapers advertise dubious goods and publish mossy pseudoscientific articles replacing old, 100-year-old terms with new, modern. Nye. Advertising the bright future of the internet, when it will be possible to find out everything about you without naming yourself. Computer newspapers give a platform to astrologers who cancel the end of the world and predict a bright future for sorcerers. The magazines are full of colored pornography, and in special radio magazines they advertise in chorus CDs with a predominance of the works of Satanists of the past and present. 80% of the books lying on the trays are devoted to esoteric knowledge, witchcraft, self-healing, etc., and their circulation is tens and hundreds of times greater than the circulation of normal secular and orthodox literature. There is no truth in newspapers, magazines, and books. But he who has ears, let him hear. UFO preachers. How are the next preachers of new and old myths about anomalous phenomena born and affirmed? If talk about massive UFO sightings, the period between their peaks lies on average within 11 years. During this time, some of the previous discoveries and revelations manage to be forgotten. Someone stops doing this, and therefore, for the average person, the next wave of observations is to a certain extent unexpected. How can you assert yourself in this field in the eyes of semi-literate inhabitants? Engage in serious study of the phenomenon? No. It takes knowledge and time. It is easier to use one of the characteristic and simple techniques. Characteristic foundations of preachers. Siegel's handwritten and typewritten volumes, there were 13 with a total of 2,670 pages, were not known to the general public. Therefore, bills made from them, and even diluted with gag, are a simple and trouble-free method to establish themselves on the ufological throne. Unless, of course, it was possible to somehow get the original source or a copy of it. You can take a vacuum cleaner, blow off the dust from D. Menzel's book, On Flying Saucers, published in the USSR in 1962, and broadcast about the beginning of ufology since 1947, and call UFOs, the paradox of the 20th century. And it is quite easy to turn to recognized professionals in the field of ufology and, motivating the request with the preparation of the next encyclopedia on UFOs, ask for biographical data and express your own point of view on the characteristic problems of the phenomenon. The author of such a supposed encyclopedia collects unique material, becomes the most informed ufologist, and keeps his only encyclopedia while at home in a box under lock and key or in a computer. Out of 3 or 4 such attempts known to me, none of them ended with the publication of an encyclopedia where objective research would be collected, but speculative books and articles in newspapers based on other people's materials were and are. UFO researchers' trail of seduction. Modern technical specialists are not only well aware of their narrow direction, but they are also proud of it and therefore, most often, without a real, orthodox upbringing, spirits. Noah Base, being atheists, are infected with special sins, lack of spirituality and pride. This explains their belief in UFOs and easy compliance with sectarians, for example, Jehovah's Witnesses, in scientific centers near Moscow, Koroleva, and Zelenograd. What can be said, for example, about one well-known academician, moreover, an academician of a normal, and not some kind of energy informational academy? What did he say when he was on television? He told how he and his son went to the garage and the academician saw a plate above the garage, but the son did not. The honored scientist was very surprised at this. And he did not think, why does the son not see these phenomena? Yes, because he has some rudiments of spirituality. The academician himself, a fan of Buddhism, is quite naturally susceptible to the attacks of the evil one. When the Siegel readings were organized 10 years ago, their slogan was the scientific study of UFOs. Now what? Siegel's readings moved away from F. Siegel's slogan, scientific study of UFOs. From science passed to parapsychology called energy information sciences, cosmoism, theosophy, and the preaching of ecumenism. Science has long been forgotten, and what has been going on there in the last few years cannot be called anything other than a black book. There they publish books on parapsychology, Lskoff's books about the cosmic future of mankind, the foundation of which is Fedorov's cosmoism and anthropocentrism. Combs's books, for example, They Came from Heaven and Created People, where there is a link to 500 literary sources, in which, under the banner of historical research, preached theosophical ideas, formed ecumenism. All these investigations ultimately lead to one thing, to Lucifer. The fact that Tsiolkovsky saw and heard these luminous essences, talked to them, is perceived not as a tragedy of a scientist, but as an interesting fact of his biography. The same applies to the flying saucers that were seen above the Tsiolkovsky House Museum in Kalyuga. The proud self-confidence and lack of spirituality of many of our scientists does not allow them to see, despite the obviousness, the hand of Satan in all these directions. It has long been said that the main thing is. Often, the authors of books about the cosmic future refer to the Bible, which allegedly contains data on the observation of the prophet Zechariah of a cylindrical and barrel-shaped UFO. It's a lie. The original source speaks not of a cylindrical UFO, but of a scroll with a curse to those who break the law, Zech 5, 1-5, and not of a barrel-shaped UFO, but of a vessel with a woman personifying the wickedness of Babylon, placed in a vessel with a lead lid and carried away by angels from the Holy Land away, Zech 5, 6-11. Unfortunately, there are many more such examples, for illiterate interpretations and retellings of the Bible for oneself are very common in our time. It is these positions that lie at the beginning of the path of seduction of modern UFO researchers. Consider the path of two physicists, an atheist and an orthodox. At the first stage, both have interesting and unusual instrumental results, a great interest in the research topic. But at the second stage, the atheist plunges into a pseudo-scientific nonsense, going deeper and deeper into devilry. The same physicist who recognizes the presence of God sees contradictions. The orthodox remembers the Holy Scripture and the cunning of demons, knows that such phenomena were written about in Russia 150 and 100 years ago, and does not believe in the new intricacies of the evil one. I believe that if a scientist doing research is honest and conscientious, he will come to God. And this will save him from many mistakes and falling into occult pseudoscience. But here the other extreme is also dangerous, the position of some scientists brought up in the traditions of the recent past, when they assured that there are no UFOs on January 6th of the globe, they are only among them, among the bourgeois. This is how the article by U.B. Platov and B.A. Sokolov, Study of Unidentified Flying Objects in the USSR, published in Bulletin of the Russian Academy of Sciences, 2000, Volume 70, No. 6. The authors, ignoring a significant part of the research, in particular in the Navy, reduce everything to the usual in Soviet times explanations of anomalies by human activity and natural phenomena, ignoring psychophysiological issues, especially from the point of view of religion. This tradition, which denies the obvious, contributes, paradoxically, to the development of precisely occult ways of studying phenomena, which Archpriest G. Dyachenko wrote about in his book, Spiritual World, 1900. Conclusion. As a result of our brief consideration of the UFO phenomenon, the following conclusions can be drawn. 1. The impact of UFOs on technical devices, nature, animals, and people is always negative. To a lesser extent, but also negative are the effects of UFO landings. 2. The strongest negative effects on people come from direct contacts with humanoids, who outwardly look like aliens, but in their inner essence are demons. 3. Modern technical specialists and people with a low level of spirituality and knowledge, who have suffered serious illnesses, injuries, and stresses, are most easily seduced by humanoid demons. 4. The most consistent opponents of observation and study of various anomalous phenomena, including UFOs, are clergymen. However, part of the spiritually illiterate intelligentsia perceived the imposed image of the priest as an illiterate person, and the patristic writings as fairy tales. In fact, representatives of the Russian clergy, and especially the saints, were broadly educated people both in theology and in secular sciences. They knew ancient and modern languages. In Russia, during the 18th and partly 19th centuries, literature was published against the enthusiasm for various anomalies, extrasensory perception, then it was called mediumship, etc. But all this is little known to our contemporaries, lazy and incurious. 5. Orthodox people, as a rule, do not see UFOs and do not enter into any contacts with extraterrestrial entities. They know their nature well from the gospel and patristic teachings and do not look for seductive visions. They are protected from demonic wiles by the shield of faith, the grace of God. 6. That is why I thought that it was necessary to honestly talk about my path of objective, instrumental study of UFO landings and their observations, the results of which were repeatedly checked and studied. As a result, not technical, but certain human factors associated with a person's spirituality and faith came to the fore. Instrument readings for believers and practically non-believers differed by tens, hundreds, and even thousands of times, especially in the anomalies of the clock and scanners of radar stations. I am grateful to the Lord that, strictly adhering to the objectivity of research, having walked along the edge of the abyss of the demonic UFO phenomenon, with God's help, I resisted falling into it. Shabash Kol Janov. The questions about the essence of extrasensory perception and other occult phenomena are answered by the Hieromonk, Doctor of Medical Sciences Fr. Anatoly Uristov. Father Anatoly, for several years now you have been heading the work of the counseling center in the name of St. Righteous John of Kronstadt for those affected by the occult. You, like no one else, are well aware of the scale of this phenomenon, which has truly become a disaster for many thousands of people. Yes, such a rampant devilry, as today, probably, the Christian world does not remember. The sorcerers saddled all the media, entered the World Information Network Internet. It is impossible to open almost any newspaper without stumbling upon advertisements like, Sorcerer PS, a specialist in black magic. Will return love forever. Guarantee, 100%, fundamentals of shamanic practices, talismans, by mail, energetic elimination of arrival, complete reprogramming of fate for good luck, punishment of rivals, debtors, getting rid of entities, devils, demons, humanoids, poverty. The strongest sorcerer of Russia, MD, hereditary clairvoyant. Master of voodoo magic. Kabbalist parapsychologist. I spell without harm to health with the strongest highly effective black involuntary spell with the result of 100% of cases. I guarantee the quality of work. Appeals to all kinds of Cosmo Energy salons, high magic studios, voodoo, Seleni vamp, teaching the secrets of witchcraft art with subsequent initiation, dedication to a demon, often end in a very deplorable and even tragic way. June 10, 1999. The newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, in the article I am healing. Dismembering. Told about a psychic from Kherson, Natalia Tukina, who had a certificate from the Ukrainian Association of Traditional Medicine and a diploma from the Educational and Methodological Center Ajima, where she attended the course, Bioenergy, Magic, Yoga. When the treatment of another patient from a serious oncological disease failed, the psychic killed the patient and cooked her remains. At the trial, the murderer healer indignantly denied the charges of insanity, stating, "Another tragedy took place in Omsk. The deputy head of the regional prosecutor's office V. Geldin committed suicide after an unknown psychic doctor made him a terrible diagnosis, brain cancer. An autopsy showed that the employee of the prosecutor's office had no trace of cancer. Such is the terrible price for deadly games with demons, which supervise the activities of all psychics, bioenergetics, healers, magicians, regardless of the name of those serving demonic forces. Hiding behind a cross and an icon. But most of those who practice psychics, including those with degrees who are tempted by this, believe that this gift is from God. Many of them have crosses and Orthodox icons. Various, Mothers Melania, hereditary Russian Orthodox Babki, Orthodox schools of folk healing, where only a sign is Orthodox. But people often trust her. Why is such an illusion so tenacious? The reason is clear: this eternal lie of the devil, a spiritual substitution, is usually difficult to recognize for non-churchly, spiritually careless people who want to get rid of all sores without repentance and purification of their souls, recklessly trusting the magic of orthodox prayers, which are increasingly used by numerous sorcerers to lure gullible patients. This ancient method of demonic disguise as orthodoxy is well known to the church. And a person, indeed, an orthodox, and not only a baptized into orthodoxy, who enters the church only to light a candle, a person who works to cleanse his soul from sin, immediately recognizes a spiritual substitution. Indeed, it is absurd to even imagine such a phrase, an orthodox psychic. What can light have in common with darkness? After all, it is precisely about such servants of the devil, putting on an angel's disguise, that Jesus Christ said, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me that day, 'Lord God, didn't we prophesy in your name? And did they not drive out demons in your name? And did not many miracles work in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you, depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.'" Matt 7:21-23. If we do not want to perish, then we must learn spiritual sobriety, reasoning. It is enough to read the description of the behavior of people at the sessions of such healers to understand what forces might stand behind them. I had a very headache, and suddenly, against my will, I began to cry. I felt very sorry for myself. I remembered all the insults. All around hysterically laughed or sobbed. The sorcerer's passes, his unpleasant voice, harsh orders annoyed. I believe that he mocked us. I saw a woman I knew writhing from laughter or tears on the stage, and it was creepy. Tears were also flowing down my face. I tried to control myself, but I could not. That is, people performed ridiculous actions beyond their will, just like those who are possessed by demons or unclean spirits. So do not be deceived or deceived by those who claim that such a gift can be from God. Our observations show that often this gift awakens in people after learning witchcraft techniques that are used by extrasensory perception. It is not a secret for any of the orthodox that extrasensory perception and the so-called bioenergetics, like any kind of occultism, are forms of witchcraft, directly stemming from black magic. Hand passes, the use of some energy received from above, from nowhere, these are, in fact, the techniques of black magic. There is no doubt about it. And in textbooks on magic, for example, published in Novosibirsk in 1996, prayers and healing are considered not as communion with God, but only as a way of psychological, magical influence on a person, and even then only if they do not enter in conflict with existing doctors' recommendations and standards. And how to explain that some healers send their patients to the temple to be baptized, confessed, and receive communion. As a rule, a novice magician cannot cope with the legion of demons accompanying a usually unbaptized person. There is also fierce competition in the demonic world. When he, having accepted the sacrament of baptism, having cleansed the house of his soul from uninvited tenants, comes to the healer, then he again denies Christ, with whom he has just been combined, and his soul is occupied at the same time by the 7 most evil demons. The same happens with confession. Confession, we put this word in quotation marks, since the confessor does not even think to repent to the priest in addressing the sorcerer, who warns him, "Just don't tell the priest." In the practice of psychics also has a magical meaning. It is also provided for by the ritual as a white and black magic. Are there good magicians? Many occultists are offended when they are called sorcerers, claiming that they are specialists in white, divine magic. But the myths about the existence of some kind of special white magic, supposedly engaged exclusively in doing good, do not stand up to criticism. Only a higher degree of demonic initiation can be hidden under this mask. In fact, the legends about good sorcerers are designed only for spiritually promiscuous people and beginning psychics at the very first stage. As a rule, the servant of white magic is well aware of the forces that he actually serves, and the orthodox sign or assurances of serving abstract good are needed only as camouflage. We know of many testimonies from church history that demons love to dress up in angelic garments to confuse those who are deceived. Any magic is the active use of communication with the world of spirits. Moreover, communication with the spirits of malice, for due to his sinfulness, a person cannot communicate with the angelic world. Many techniques of both magic and extrasensory perception are nothing more than methods of invoking spirits and certain manipulations to protect the magicians themselves from the spirits of evil who have gone out of obedience. Healers use a special mantra, Eastern spell, where they call on the great, infinite power to enter them in order to make them their guide. In fact, this is the invocation of the demon so that he entered the soul of the psychic and acted through him. And if a certified psychic is given an individual mantra during initiation, witchcraft initiation, then a personal demon-patron is provided to the unfortunate. Not everyone knows what happens during such an initiation. Occultist Alexander Char in the book The Evil Eye. Damage. Part I. Classification gives the text of the renunciation of the Lord, of my own parents. May the Lord forgive me that I will, if necessary, cite this blasphemy so that psychic patients know what kind of orthodoxy and good they are dealing with. I will refuse from Jesus Christ. From the King of the earth, from the Orthodox faith, from father, from mother. I surrender myself to an unclean spirit and accursed power. This is to whom millions of our fellow citizens entrust their souls, the servants of accursed power who have denied Christ. So let's not build illusions. Despite the fervent assurances of fidelity to orthodoxy, psychics, sorcerers, if they do not bring church repentance, thereby make a choice in favor of the forces of evil and begin conscious service to him. If, at some stage, an epiphany occurs and the healer realizes that he is serving completely different forces than he was thinking about when he started, and that he repents in his deeds, confesses sins, passes the rite of renouncing occult studies, the rite of joining the church, then these so-called supernatural powers go away on their own. We have repeatedly observed cases when people lost these abilities after receiving holy baptism. It is also not uncommon for the best psychics to lose the ability to heal after the exorcism, expulsion of evil spirits, in the Trinity Sergius Labra. It is also interesting that Kashpirovsky, whom his admirers around him have already proclaimed almost a god, for example, a society in defense of Kashpirovsky is actively being created, which is essentially a sect, was afraid to accept holy baptism, admitting that in this case the gift will go away from him. Reserve opportunities from the underworld. Recently, the myth about the so-called reserved capabilities of the human body has become widespread, which supposedly used by psychics and parapsychologists. Those who crave help from numerous healers do not think, why exactly this person, who promises healing from everything and everyone, has any abilities? Where did he get these powers? And why did they suddenly appear? And if these abilities are inherent in him and in every person by God, then why don't I have them? Such simple questions, which put a lot in their place, rarely occur to anyone. We know well from the works of the Holy Fathers of Orthodoxy that anomalous abilities can manifest in a person from dark forces, from demons. They can be congenital or obtained with the help of special exercises, but, of course, from a certain, far from divine source. These are not abilities in the usual sense, but the direct action of evil spirits through a person. Numerous observations indicate the devilish origin of superpowers. At different times, the devil appeared to two different young people in a dream and told them that they would soon receive the gift of healing. Let them prepare for this. And a year later, again in a dream, the devil again appeared to them and said that from now on, receiving this gift of healing, they become powerful people and can rule over others. And, indeed, when they woke up, they felt an extraordinary strength in themselves and were surprised to see that they could heal other people's illnesses with their own hands. But, fortunately, they were frightened of this phenomenon, came to the priest, told about it. The priest, having talked with them, found out that one of them was engaged in martial arts, wushu, and the other was a drug addict. That is, they opened the gates of the soul for the devil. After repentance, communion, this gift has disappeared from young people. That is, the demon retreated from them. Repeatedly I had to observe such cases when the gifts of the so-called clairvoyance, telepathy, telekinesis, proscopy, vision of the insides of a person, when the healer as if shines through other people with an X-ray, appeared after visiting psychics or studying in various occult schools. Such reserve opportunities suddenly appeared after the initiation in schools of Reiki of different levels. But here's what is interesting. Our observations show that these human possibilities unknown to science yet completely disappear after repentance or holy baptism. Very strange possibilities. I must say that irons, forks, and other objects do not stick to orthodox church people, which delights some scientists. It is almost impossible for demons to do their tricks with a person protected by prayer, the sacraments of the church. Is it possible to say that during initiation the demon always infiltrates a person, and then the demon himself performs almost all extraordinary manipulations, creating the illusion of the omnipotence of the person with whom he got hooked? After all, the healer himself usually has no idea how he learns, say, about a disease of some organ, how, not only without a medical education, but being completely illiterate in matters of medicine, makes a diagnosis. Someone is putting these ready-made answers into his head? There is no doubt that in every case of treatment and diagnosis, a direct demonic influence is manifested. But one thing is lack of manners and obsession, and another, when the demon contributes to the manifestation of some abilities in the person himself. This is also possible. As a pediatrician, I can say that children from 2 to 5 years old often have supernatural abilities for telepathy and clairvoyance. These properties may appear earlier, but babies usually cannot tell about it until the age of 2. But let us note that the more frequent unusual phenomena in children are evidence of the increased influence of demons, especially on non-church families and families where parents indulge in the occult or reading magical literature. In Orthodox families, however, such phenomena, as a rule, are not observed, and if they do occur, they pass away. According to the testimony of the Holy Fathers, in particular, Silvan the Athonite, such abilities in a person can be innate and even inherited. And we see that they are found among the descendants of people engaged in witchcraft, magic and other black deeds. And this is observed, by the way, very often. Abilities obtained illegally by ancestors are transmitted through the family patron demon of a witchcraft family. But most often we see the manifestation of occult skills under the influence of a special kind of psychological and physical training, those that are used in various mystical schools. One woman, after falling as a result of hitting the back of her head on the ground, began to see various human organs, observe the astral worlds, after which she gathered a group of those hungry for a miracle around her, put them into a trance and sent them for walks into the astral plane. Arranging a date there with Jesus Christ, then began to heal, being mentally ill herself. Why is this happening? Often, mentally damaged people are drawn to such activities. The local press reported that the Licensed Medical Commission of Alexandrov, a small town in the Vladimir region, analyzed 10 diplomas of healers practicing in the city, issued by various organizations. So, 8 holders of such diplomas of international standard turned out to be mentally ill people themselves. Imagine what could happen if such a person tries to influence the patient or the audience with bioenergetic methods. In the same town of Alexandrov, a case is known when a woman who decided to relieve stress during a session where psychics treated diabetes, having experienced a state of hysteria, psychological shock, fell ill with diabetes herself. As for the manifestation of some unusual phenomena after trauma or intervention in the brain or subconsciousness, I have also observed such cases. I knew a young man who was engaged in hypnopedic exercises, that is, teaching English in a dream. During sleep, a tape recorder with English texts was automatically turned on. Once he got up after such a lesson, he suddenly could not speak Russian. And he spoke only English. Moreover, he did not understand Russian and could only communicate in English. The brain is like a mediator between the soul and the body. It turns out that the work of our soul is done through the brain. Of course, the brain and soul are interconnected. And some changes in the brain can be accompanied on the subtle, mental plane, I would say, on the subconscious level, by a change in normal perception. It cannot be disregarded that in the physical plane the brain is an organ of consciousness. This does not mean that the brain generates consciousness, but through it the soul manifests itself in the physical plane. And therefore, some brain disorders can affect the manifestation of the soul, just as mental and spiritual abnormalities can affect the brain, change its work. If a talented musician plays on a well-tuned piano, we will witness amazing music, and the musical instrument will last longer. Likewise, a sinful soul can lead to the defeat of its instrument through which it manifests itself. And if a good musician sits behind a bad, untuned instrument, he will not be able to produce good music. There will be dissonance, discord. In the same way, a diseased brain can lead to an abnormal manifestation of the soul and spirit in a person. Although the soul and spirit can be pure, perfect, they cannot manifest themselves. In the same way, in sick people, in oligophrenics, for example, the brain is affected, and the spirit can be pure. He will not be able to show himself normally. Is it possible to say about a person with little intelligence from birth that he is a sinner? But the manifestation of the spirit and soul in him is abnormal, incomplete. So the relationship between the brain and the soul must be considered. It is bad if the clergy and parishioners do not take this into account. Sometimes we have to hear from the Orthodox, meeting with a person who is not intelligent from birth, such a statement about him: this is a demoniac. But why a demoniac if he has an underdeveloped brain? Is the devil to blame for this? Has the demon ruined his brain? It is a disease, a malformation of the brain. And in this case, this sick person has nothing to do with it. Another thing is that he may be more susceptible than others to the influence of the demonic world, since his condition may have been affected by the guilt of his ancestors. Say, grandfather or father were alcoholics, or mother was a drug addict. Or the ancestors were sorcerers, which, by the way, is observed very often. Either sick children or children with witchcraft, psychic abilities are born in the families of sorcerers. The young man who, after English lessons in a dream, forgot his native Russian language, allowed him to make an unacceptable intervention in the brain at the subconscious level. The waking consciousness during sleep could not control the flow of information. And it affected him at the subconscious level, which led to unpredictable consequences. But it is at the subconscious level that all sorcerers, magicians, healers, psychics act. This very situation with extremely negative consequences was modeled by that young man. Therefore, I repeat this again, to say that sorcerers, magicians, and healers from God are a terrible sin, blasphemy. They cannot be from God. And if they have some kind of extrasensory abilities, then this does not mean at all that the Lord gave them. Yes, a person can be born with them for various reasons, we talked about them, but using them is a sin. It is better to ask God to get rid of these abilities. Something like activating medicines, or something about the essence of homeopathy. How can you explain, for example, that a psychic, diagnosing with a person's hands or examining a photograph, objectively feels tingling, vibrations, coldness? What kind of sensations are these and why do they lend themselves to some kind of classification? For example, healers claim that in case of oncological diseases they feel icy vibrations, etc. I do not know what kind of sensations it is, since I personally, thank God, did not experience such sensations. It can be assumed that since demonic forces participate in any bioenergetic session, their conductor, a psychic, thus feels the impact of their energetic nature. In church practice, for example, there are cases when parishioners, helping people possessed by a demon, felt like a slight electric shock emanating from the palms and crown of these people. I myself had to once experience the diagnosis of some psychics. One doctor, a fallist, that is, using the Volopychev diagnostic method, by the way, calling himself orthodox, decided with my consent to diagnose me. He gave me a bunch of diagnoses. Thank God, I did not have any of these diseases. But he could not detect the real diseases that I had. So here the doctor, one might say, went nuts. Moreover, this failure did not depend on the professionalism of the physician. The essence here is in the method itself, which is not based on any objective research methods. One may ask, what has Val's method got to do with it? Is it not an occult method? But the time has come to establish the truth and reflect on the origins of homeopathy. For a long time I could not understand the essence of homeopathy. What is it? Is it a normal method or an occult one? And when I was asked whether it is possible to use homeopathy and whether the use of homeopathic remedies by Orthodox Christians is legal, I always answered, I don't know, since I did not have a clear idea of this. But now I am more and more coming to the conclusion that homeopathy in its origins is still an occult method of treatment. And that's why. Homeopathy must be viewed in three aspects: medical, scientific, and spiritual. As for the medical aspect, then I must say that I do not know of a single organic disease that would be cured by homeopaths. No one. Those positive results from the treatment of homeopathy, which I saw, always concerned only functional diseases, neurotic, where neuroses, neurotic breakdowns, suggestions and autosuggestions are based, or psychosomatic. I have not seen a single healed organic disease. So the medical effect of homeopathy is, to put it mildly, a big question. As for the scientific aspects of homeopathy, they cannot even be called into question, since they simply do not exist. The spiritual aspects of homeopathy immediately unwittingly suggest occult influences. Yes, those positive results from treatment with homeopathic remedies that we see are associated with suggestion and self-hypnosis. This is essentially a placebo dummy effect that occurs in 25% of cases. Is it possible to treat a disease not with potent drugs, but using salt, sugar, soda, but at the same time telling the patient that these are very powerful drugs that are extremely powerful in this particular disease? Of course, placebo is not an occult method, but it is an effect of suggestion and self-hypnosis, which occultists can also use. So it is inappropriate to recognize any special influences behind homeopathy. This is an effect primarily and mainly psychotherapeutic. And is it not alarming that sorcerers recognize homeopathy as their method of treatment and believe that in homeopathy there is an effect on the astral level of a person, that is, again, on the spiritual level, through suggestion and self-hypnosis, which are performed at the level of not only consciousness, but the main way through the subconscious. Take Hahnemann, who was an occultist, alchemist, and Freemason. He still based homeopathy on occult influence. Homeopaths believe that the whole secret of the effects of their medicines lies in the medicine preparation technique known as activation. One of the homeopaths, Kent, writes, "We activate our medicines to reach the simple substance, that is, the divine essence." Thus, according to homeopathy, the effects of its medicines are explained by the secret, divine properties of the substance, which are revealed together with activation and are often of a latent spiritual nature. As you can see, we find here a manifestation of precisely occultism. The same thing was clearly stated by Hahnemann. The medicinal force is not in the material particles of highly activated drugs, and also not in their physical or mathematical plane, but it is opened and freed from the medicinal material. This kind of force seems to be torn off, is freed from the medicine itself, because this force separated from the medicine, from matter, is as much more effective as it has become freer and more immaterial by way of activation. Elsewhere, he writes, rubbing the medicinal substance and shaking the solution develops the hidden healing powers of the substance and reveals them more and more, or, more correctly, exhales the substance, if I may say so, And further he writes, through such activation, the substance completely dissolves in its own air-like nature, and therefore we can say, that in its physical state it consists only of this air-like essence that does not lend itself to development. Thus, here this spiritual essence of the medicine, or the divine essence of the substance, breaks away from the substance itself, and it is she who, as it were, is the healing power. In support of this, I will cite one more amazing quote, this time from Papouz's book, Practical Magic, Bishkek, 1992. As you know, magic recognizes a physical, mental, and astral body. It is proposed to treat the physical body with the help of large doses of material substances. This is allopathy. The medicine of opposites is one that is familiar to most of our contemporaries. The astral body is modified with the help of liquid substances in the smallest doses. This is homeopathy, the first application of magic to the microcosm. A microcosm in magic is called a person. Ed. The mental body, or psychic being, is changed by the action of thought, animated by the will of the magician. In citing these black magic, witchcraft testimonies, I in no way want to cast a shadow on honest homeopathic doctors who are not occultists, among whom there are many sincere believers, orthodox people. I don't think they've heard of the effects of homeopathy on the astral body. But can we now, having learned the truth about where homeopathy was created and what powers it feeds on, still trustfully use it? I think that the positive effect that patients get from orthodox homeopathic doctors is not achieved at the expense of the occult. Activation of substances, and thanks to completely different factors, it can be the power of prayer, and faith in healing, and self-hypnosis. I think if a sincere believer suddenly found out that one of the prayers that he had been praying fervently since childhood, having learned it from his grandmother, carries elements of pagan conspiracies. In any case, we, Orthodox, before deciding to use homeopathy, must thoroughly and objectively understand everything, having delved into the deep essence of this method. It would be important to openly discuss this topic with the participation of doctors, priests, specialists. How many Christs are there in Russia? People are often confused by unusual phenomena. An officer, one of the leaders of the colony for repeat offenders, who suffered from alcoholism, suddenly saw Christ, who handed him a golden sword and said, "Here is a sword for you to fight enemies and diseases." After that, this military man stopped drinking and suddenly discovered psychic abilities in himself. When he arrived in Moscow, the convert was quickly taken over by various magical associations claiming to revive the planet, nothing more, nothing less. For an Orthodox person, it is obvious that this demon appeared under the guise of Christ. But a man, not yet churchly and even unbaptized, believed this phenomenon. Why could this happen? We must remember the gospel words that in the last times false Christs and false prophets will appear in multitudes and deceive many. Nowadays, this is a very common occurrence, and many are bought for it. Recently, a well-known physician and scientist came to me, who told me how Christ appeared to him in a dream and taught him how to develop the branch of science in which this scientist works. This is such a blatant deception of a person by the devil that one can only regret these people, who are false Christs, in essence, demons. After all, any sane Orthodox Christian will immediately understand what is the matter here. These phenomena are possible only against the background of religious ignorance. Taking advantage of our spiritual ignorance and life outside the church, demons become extremely impudent and act as soon as they want. One of the so-called gurus, as teachers of the occult sciences now call themselves, who heads the training center, assured her disciples that she works directly with Jesus Christ and heals exclusively with divine formulas, unlike her colleagues who contact with lower ranks. This belief in one's own special chosenness, inspired by the fallen spirits, also became a mass phenomenon. How many people came to me who said that they work on the instructions of Jesus Christ or the Mother of God? Even more than that, they sent me letters or brought notes on behalf of Christ, where I was also asked to work on behalf of Christ. They also brought letters on behalf of the Holy Trinity. And one person brought me a message on behalf of Satan himself. These are mainly mentally ill people who, of course, require active spiritual and medical treatment. It is scary when such people are promoted to healers, to mentors of the masses. There is a known case in Krasnoyarsk, when a woman who imagined herself to be Christ in a woman's body was allowed to conduct classes in the New Space Teachings circle at a higher educational institution and managed to entice several people with her. Giving them the titles of Andrew the First called Mother of God, made me blindly obey myself. Following their idol, who was considered the Messiah, the unfortunate victims, leaving their families and children, left for the Moscow region in order, in large spiritual centers, to unite with those who would save the planet, no more, no less. And how many such secret and overt occult centers have proliferated in Russia? At the same time, sorcerers of high initiations often use such mentally unstable or simply sick people for their own purposes. If a normal, healthy person, having been seduced, believes in the appearance of Christ, then the consequences for himself may be even more dire. This contact usually ends in a severe mental illness, suicide, or a serious tragic death. Something similar happened to the officer whom we talked about. After the appearance of Christ with the golden sword, a terrible tragedy occurred. His son was stabbed to death by prisoners, and then, one after another, with an interval of 10 days, his father and mother died. Yes, this is a completely typical phenomenon. Only we do not hear about many tragedies. And the affected people do not always associate them with the action of the demonic force to which they entrusted their souls. Does it really matter who heals you? People who go to a psychic for help usually reason pragmatically. Does it matter from whose hands we get help? The main thing is that it helps. No, not all the same. First, it doesn't help. And secondly, it is not all the same. We will receive healing from God or from his enemy, who outwardly can give us the appearance of healing, but in fact will take our soul for eternal torment. What happens to a person who is exposed to some unknown powers of a healer? A psychic or a sorcerer influences the patient with a part of his own soul, corrupted by sin. In the language of the psychics themselves, he introduces part of his energy, sinful soul, into the subconscious of a person, into the depths of someone else's soul. In other words, it violently affects the human psyche. The implemented program begins to act both on the human consciousness and on the soma, that is, the body. This can lead to certain psychosomatic changes, at first glance, positive. But usually, healings of some organs in the future turn into either the resumption of the disease or the transition of the disease to another organ, or the occurrence of exactly the same disease in the closest relatives, or even suicide. Here, of course, the negative spiritual impact of the demonic world is felt, if it is not about infectious diseases or those diseases that are of a genetic nature. But the most dangerous thing is that in this case, in fact, a person's obsession with another spirit begins. On this basis, the spiritual or psychological dependence of the patient on the psychic develops. Modern psychologists are trying to explain this by the development of the dominant at the neurophysiological level. Occult treatment centers and lone psychics in many ways act like totalitarian sects. The will is suppressed, the psyche changes, a person's dependence on the personality of one or another healer takes root. People fall into deep depression, live in a state of enduring fear of punishment for a possible refusal of the services of an occultist. Severe forms of occult illness, severe neuroses of obsessive fears, not amenable to any medication, are manifested. Often, soon after contacting psychics, people turn to cancer centers. Their tumors grow rapidly. I know the case of a boy whose benign tumor in the frontotemporal region quickly developed into a malignant one after his mother forced her son to watch Kashpirovsky's sessions. In the books created on the basis of materials from the counseling center in the name of St. Righteous John of Kronstadt for those who suffered from the occult, this terrible danger is shown. These are the books, The Number of the Beast, and Orthodox Sorcerers. Who are they? Are the present victims of the occult similar to those that came in the early years of the center's existence? What are people suffering the most from now? Suffer from the same thing, from turning to psychics, sorcerers, from attending Reiki schools. We see the most severe defeats from fashionable, the most powerful sorcerers and psychics and from Reiki. Often, after the initiation into Reiki, people came to us with acute and acutely developed psychoses, on the verge of suicide. And a huge number of people come with chronic mental and psychosomatic disorders, which they developed after turning to Reikists. This is a usual flow of patients for us, with whom we have to work very hard both with spiritual and medical methods in order to bring them out of a painful depression. We receive several thousand victims a year. With sadness I can state that among the victims of occult superstitions there are also people who actively attend the divine services of the Church, participating in its sacraments. On a pilgrimage trip to the Holy Land, I learned about a woman who, having accepted the holy mysteries on Tabor, came to the ship's cabin, covered her head with aspen logs. Supposedly aspen draws off negative energy. For this, if I may say so, Christians and pilgrims, the pieces of wood turned out to be stronger than the sacrament. Many Christians use astrological horoscopes, believing that there is nothing terrible in them. After my lecture, many Orthodox Christians opened up in confession, repented that they accepted the doctrine of karma and reincarnation. But this is a direct denial of Christ. It is a shame to say that such a thing exists among seemingly church people. Nothing less than spiritual laziness.